Chapter 510. The Top 10-Inch Heavens. Zhuan has actually entered the top 10? How is he so fast? To speed. I clearly remember that this kid had already stopped at the 500th step before nightfall and was ranked around 325th. How did he enter the top 10 in the blink of an eye? Zhuan must have continuously climbed after nightfall. That's why he was able to surpass so many practitioners and enter the top 10 so quickly. On the countless stairs within Zhongling Mountain, the other genius practitioners finally noticed the strange light that was Zhuan. In a short period of time, he had leapt from the 150th rank to the top 10. This speed had truly caused many people's jaws to drop. Zhuowen's unique climbing speed had finally attracted the attention of the other four geniuses, with the exception of LV Tao. How did Zhuowen's speed become so fast? He's actually already entered the top 10, and has already reached the 900th step? Seated on the 105th step, Qin Batian finally sensed that something was amiss. He looked at the light that represented Zhuowen in his identity badge. At this moment, he had actually entered the top 10 so quickly, and a sliver of danger rose in his heart. This little bastard actually didn't die? Fourth place Su Tianyang's eyes flickered as his heart was filled with astonishment. In his opinion, Zhuowen, who was originally dead for sure, had actually appeared in the top 10 alive. One could imagine how he was feeling in his heart. Third place Zhuowen's eyelids only twitched slightly as his somewhat scarlet eyes coldly glanced at 10th place Zhun. He once again sat down on the stairs. In his heart, he only had two opponents, LV Tao and Luo Xing. Zhuowen's performance was indeed dazzling, but in his opinion, it was simply not enough. After all, Zhuowen was only at the peak of the ultimate second-wheel emperor stage. Such a cultivation was merely a clown in his eyes. Therefore, he believed that 10th place should be Zhuowen's limit. Second place Luo Xing's beautiful eyes were filled with a complicated expression as she helplessly shook her head and muttered to herself, "This Zhuowen is simply messing around. To think that he actually charged so fiercely after nightfall. This will undoubtedly exhaust too much of his strength in advance." As she spoke, Luo Xing no longer paid any attention to Zhuowen. In her opinion, Zhuowen's actions were merely sensationalism. While everyone was guessing Zhuowen's unique actions, Zhuowen was desperately escaping on the stairs. The higher he climbed, the more terrifying the pressure on Zhuowen became. Why is it still not letting me go? Don't tell me it doesn't get tired? Zhuowen's heart turned cold as he sensed the approaching pressure behind him. Zhuowen. Xiaohei. What should I do? The pressure here is getting more and more terrifying. I'm afraid that it will be difficult for me to maintain my speed. If I slow down, I will definitely die. Zhuowen's heart was filled with despair as he hurriedly asked for help from Xiaohei. Boy, you have to hold on. It's impossible for the artifact spirit of Zhongling Mountain to keep chasing you. After all, there's an extremely powerful true dragon suppressed under Zhongling Mountain. It's impossible for it to waste too much energy on you, Xiaohei suddenly said. Hearing this, Zhuowen also knew that Xiaohei did not have many solutions. The only thing he could do now was to try his best to hold on and gamble that the artifact spirit would not lose everything because of him. Damn it! How can I die here? I still have a lot of things to do. With a low roar, Zhuowen let out an inhuman roar from his throat. Then, the surface of Zhuowen's body emitted an even more dazzling golden light. At the same time, the sound of bones cracking could be heard. The aura on Zhuowen's body had reached an even more terrifying level. In the sea of consciousness, Xiaohei looked at Zhuowen, who was covered in golden light, in amazement. She could not help but exclaim, "This boy actually managed to open the 151st aperture in the face of death just now. The strength of his body has increased by several times." A beast-like roar suddenly resounded in his ears. A large gray hand appeared above Zhuowen's head at this time and slammed down violently. It wanted to kill Zhuowen directly. Just as the gray hand was about to slam down, Zhuowen's entire body flickered with a golden light. His speed actually doubled, and he actually managed to pull away from the gray hand in an instant. As for the gray hand that was about to slam down, it only slammed into the stairs behind him. Boom! A loud explosion resounded. The stairs behind him were directly shattered into powder and dust filled the air. A heart-wrenching roar suddenly resounded behind him. Then, the force seemed to be afraid of something. After the attack missed, it retreated like a tide. Puff, puff. The sound of rapid breathing could be heard. Feeling the threat behind him recede, Zhuowen finally revealed a relaxed smile and sat down on the ground. Xiaohei, what you said is really accurate. The weapon spirit of Zhongling Mountain really has some scruples and does not dare to chase for too long. It seems that the true dragon suppressed under Zhongling Mountain is very powerful. Otherwise, the weapon spirit would not have given up on me. Zhuowen said with a smile. Boy, don't misunderstand. I am also a little confused about why the weapon spirit retreated. Wasn't the reason why I said that at that time so that you could work harder? Otherwise, why would you try so hard to escape? Xiaohei laughed and said awkwardly. Unknowingly, Zhuowen realized that he had already reached more than 900 steps and was now ranked 10th. Even Zhuowen was a little stunned at such a speed. One had to know that he had been chased by the force behind him the entire time. He had no time to think about his ranking and speed. He was only focused on escaping. Xiaohei, you said before that there is more than one weakness in Zhongling Mountain. In other words, there is also the same spiritual energy as the 500th step on the other steps? Zhuowen suddenly asked. It should be. This Zhongling Mountain is extremely huge, and the spiritual energy contained within it is very abundant. The larger the size, the more weaknesses there will naturally be. Perhaps the second weakness is on the 1000th step? Xiaohei analyzed seriously. It was an antique that had lived for tens of thousands of years. Naturally, it had seen many treasures like royal rank soul treasures. Its knowledge was much greater than Zhuowen's. If that's the case, maybe I can open 365 acupoints in advance in Zhongling Mountain and reach the entry level of the Great Nirvana Sun. Hearing this, Zhuowen said excitedly. Even so, you have to be careful. The next time you absorb spiritual energy, don't absorb too much. Just like this time, you angered the weapon spirit. You only need to absorb a small portion. After all, this Zhongling Mountain is extremely high. If you absorb a small portion every 500 steps, it will accumulate quite a bit. Xiaohei suddenly reminded him cautiously. Zhuowen nodded seriously. After suffering such a huge loss and almost losing his life, Zhuowen naturally did not dare to absorb too much spiritual energy. Let's see if the 1000th step is also one of the weaknesses of Zhongling Mountain. If it is, then according to this pattern, Mind Great Nirvana Sun really has hope to reach the entry level. As he spoke, Zhuowen's eyes lit up. His gaze stared at the steps in front of him and became extremely passionate. Perhaps these steps were difficult for others, but to Zhuowen, who tempered his body, it was a kind of training in disguise. Although this kind of training was not very obvious, it did exist. Dang dang dang. The crisp sound of footsteps echoed on the steps again. At this time, the night had still not faded, but Zhuowen was indeed firmly and passionately walking towards the 1000th step. He really wanted to verify his and Xiaohei's conjecture. There was still a weakness on the 1000th step, and there was still rich spiritual energy at the bottom of the steps. If there was, this Zhongling Mountain would be Zhuowen's good fortune. 960 steps. 970 steps. 980 steps. 990 steps. Boom boom boom. Countless pressure formed an invisible pressure around Zhuowen's body. It was like a spiral whirlwind that directly pressed down on his body. Even at this time, Zhuowen's body was somewhat swaying, as if he was on the verge of collapse. What a terrifying pressure. Only the 10th step is left. Step over it for me. With a low shout, Zhuowen suddenly stepped on the 991st step. Instantly, countless pressure pressed down on Zhuowen's somewhat thin body like a tide, and the dense sound of bones exploding continuously rang out. Puchi! A mouthful of blood suddenly spat out, and the surface of Zhuowen's body almost burst into a bloody mist. He almost fell backwards, but Zhuowen was unyielding. With a loud shout, his body suddenly erupted with an intense golden light, and the golden light on the surface of his body became even more dazzling. I've opened the 152nd aperture. This pressure really has an extraordinary effect on the Great Nirvana Sun. In the sea of consciousness, Xiao He also felt the sudden surge of aura in Zhuowen's body and sighed softly as she muttered. Boom. In the end, Zhuowen stepped on the 991st step. In an instant, countless pressures spiraled around the surface of Zhuowen's body. Tap tap tap. The moment he stepped on the 991st step, Zhuowen's expression was solemn. His feet were like the wind, and he easily crossed the next 9 steps, directly reaching the 1000th step. One had to know that every time Zhuowen opened an aperture in his body, the strength of his body would increase by a lot. After opening the 152nd aperture, the pressure of the remaining 9 steps did not have much effect on him. When Zhuowen finally stood on the 1000th step, his face froze for a moment before he smiled. His smile slowly bloomed, and he finally laughed out loud. Because the pressure on the 1000th step was indeed much weaker than the surrounding steps, it meant that this step was the same as the 500th step, a weak point of Zhongling Mountain. And the moment Zhuowen stepped on the 1000th step, on the golden tower that sat on the platform at the top of the mountain, Zhuowen's ranking finally rose from 10th to 6th, only 5 steps away from Qin Badian. Chapter 511. 6th place, 6th place. Everyone on the platform stared at the golden tower in a daze. Although no one had any doubts about Zhuowen's strength, they didn't think that it was possible for Zhuowen to reach the 6th place. As for Zhuowen being able to reach the 6th rank, no one found it strange. However, Zhuowen had jumped from the 150th rank to the 6th rank when the pressure was at its strongest when night fell on Zhongling Mountain. Such speed and method was the reason why everyone found it inconceivable. Some people even thought that there was something wrong with their eyes. Such abnormal speed had greatly exceeded their expectations. Zhuowen has stopped at the 1000th step. It seems that this is his limit. After all, this kid's rise during the night was a bit too fierce, so he should stop and rest. Zhuowen's strength seems to be beyond our expectations. If this kid climbed during the day, he might be able to compete for the top 3. But now, he has exhausted too much of his strength during the night. I'm afraid his final result won't be much higher than the 1000th step. When they saw that Zhuowen had finally stopped at the 1000th step, many sighs of regret sounded out from the platform. They all knew that Zhuowen was able to climb to the 1000th step at night. If it was during the day, his result would be even better. But now that Zhuowen had stopped, his limit should be around the 1000th step. Therefore, many people felt that it was a pity that Zhuowen had wasted too much energy during the night when the pressure was much stronger. It wasn't worth it. Lu Nantian nodded with satisfaction. The more he looked at Zhuowen, the more he liked him. Whether it was strength or talent, this kid was comparable to the top geniuses of the 5 super forces. Moreover, he was very young. If he was carefully nurtured, his strength would undergo an earth-shattering change. After the Origin Qi Tower ends, no matter what price I have to pay, I will definitely pull Zhuowen into the house of Marquis Qin. At the very least, I need to build a good relationship with Zhuowen. He will definitely become one of the main figures in the War of the 9 Counties. Lu Nanshan's eyes lit up. In fact, he didn't care too much about who won the Vitality Tower competition because he knew very well that the Vitality Tower competition was only a means to select the geniuses of Muqin County. Lu Nanshan's ultimate goal was the upcoming Great Battle of the 9 Countries. During the Great Battle of the 9 Countries, not only would the Qing Emperor ranking list be rearranged, but the top 3 countries would also be selected. If Muqin County could enter the top 3, the ruler of the Qing Xian Empire, Great Emperor Qing, would probably reward them with a lot of resources, which would be very beneficial for the development of Muqin County. It was precisely because of the Battle of the 9 Countries that Lu Nantian had a strong desire for outstanding geniuses. If a peerless genius like LV Tao could appear in the Battle of the 9 Countries this time, Muqin Marquis Mansion would have a 90% chance of winning the Battle of the 9 Countries. It was a pity that a peerless genius like LV Tao couldn't be created just by relying on resources. It should be known that Luo Xing of the Jade Lady Star Court was already extremely talented, but the gap between her and LV Tao was still very large. On Zhongling Mountain, when Zhuowen's ranking soared to the 6th place, Qin Badian and Su Tianliang, who were originally ranked 5th and 4th, felt something. They took out their identity tokens and immediately saw Zhuowen's light spot behind them. Motherfucker! What's wrong with this Zhuan? When did he reach the 1000th step? Is there only a gap of 5 steps between us? Qin Batian, who was sitting cross-legged on the 1005th step, suddenly couldn't stay calm. Like a mad tiger, he suddenly jumped up and his face was filled with disbelief. Although Zhuowen's climbing speed had indeed attracted his attention, at that time, Zhuowen's number of steps wasn't very high. At that time, he didn't pay much attention to it. He only felt that there was something wrong with this Zhuowen's brain. How could he climb Zhongling Mountain at night? However, he didn't think so anymore. The long night was only half over, and this Zhuan had actually reached the 1000th step unknowingly. This speed really shocked him. Isn't this Zhuan only at the peak of the ultimate emperor stage? How could he climb to such a height at night? No, I definitely can't let this brat surpass me. Otherwise, I'll definitely be beaten to death by my father. At this moment, Qin Batian was like an ant on a hot pan. If he was overtaken by Lve Tao, Su Tianliang and the other 4 geniuses, he wouldn't have any objections. After all, he was one of the weaker ones among the 5 geniuses, and it wouldn't be shameful for him to be overtaken by them. However, Zhuan was merely a cultivator from a low-grade city. In his eyes, cultivators with such a background were all lowly and insignificant existences. If he was overtaken by Zhuan, he would really lose a lot of face. Furthermore, he would definitely be beaten up when he returned. In order to not be beaten up, Qin Batian gritted his teeth and stood up once again. His foot suddenly landed on the 1006th step. However, the pressure at night was really too terrifying. Furthermore, after the 1000th step, the pressure would undergo a qualitative change. Even Qin Batian couldn't help but feel his chest tighten. With a groan, Qin Batian said somewhat discouraged, "The pressure is too strong. Let's wait until daybreak. After the 1000th step, the pressure will undergo a qualitative change. This Zhuan probably won't be so crazy as to continue climbing at night." As he spoke, Qin Batian kept his identity token and sat down cross-legged to meditate. He planned to immediately climb tomorrow morning and shake off this Zhuowen as much as possible. As for the 4th place Su Tianliang, his mood was extremely bad. Especially when he saw the 6th place Zhuowen's name, his expression became extremely ugly. When did this little bastard reach 6th place? His eyes flickered as Su Tianliang stood up. Zhuowen's rapid ascent had finally caused Su Tianliang to feel a sense of crisis. With his arrogance, he definitely wouldn't allow this Zhuan to surpass him, even if it was close to him. Back then, you were just a stray dog under this seat. To actually be able to reach this level, it seems like you have made some progress. However, if you want to surpass me, Zhen, you better wait for your next life. As he spoke, Su Tianliang suddenly took a step forward and directly walked towards the next step. Countless layers of pressure pressed down on his spine, but Su Tianliang didn't feel it at all. He only let out a muffled groan and still climbed up the steps step by step. He, Su Tianliang, also had his own pride. On the 1000th step, Yuan silently stood there as he stared at the steps below him. He smiled and said, "The heavens are really helping me. I never thought that the 1000th step would actually have a weakness. Looks like there's hope for a breakthrough in the great Nirvana Sun. Pay attention this time. Last time, you were too greedy, so you caused the weapon spirit of Zhongling Mountain to counterattack. This time, you must not absorb too much spiritual energy. Don't drain the pond to catch fish. Try to slow down. This Dragon Lord will help you hide your aura. As long as you don't go overboard, the weapon spirit won't notice." At this moment, Xiao He in his mind became particularly serious. Recalling the previous experience of being chased by the weapon spirit, it wasn't too good. "Don't worry. This time, I will pay attention. This time, I will absorb the spiritual energy of breaking through 20 apertures." Zhuan also nodded. "You can absorb it now. This Dragon Lord will cover you." Xiao He nodded. With a wave of her small claws, a black mist immediately enveloped the steps. Taking a deep breath, Zhuan did not hold back. His right hand formed a claw, and a stream of golden veins burst out from his body. Then, Zhuan suddenly pointed his claw, and like a reinforced iron bone, it blasted a palm-sized hole on the steps. With Zhuowen's current physical strength, it wasn't too difficult to shatter this relatively weak step. Whoosh! Waves of blue mist-like spiritual energy slowly flowed out of the hole, and Zhuowen immediately sat cross-legged, silently absorbing this spiritual energy to strengthen the mental strength in his Naiwen palace, so that he could use the strengthened mental strength to break through the remaining apertures. This time, under Xiao Hei's reminder, Zhuowen deliberately suppressed the speed of absorbing spiritual energy, so the speed of breaking through the apertures became much slower. However, Zhuowen also realized that this slow process of absorbing spirit qi did not cause the slightest reaction from Zhongling Mountain's artifact spirit. It seemed that what Xiao Hei said was right. A thin stream flowing for a long time was indeed much better than a turbulent sea. Boom, boom, boom. Golden light spread throughout Zhuowen's body, and golden veins spread to every corner of Zhuowen's body, causing Zhuowen to look dignified and sacred. Under the effect of the spiritual energy, each aperture was slowly broken through by Zhuowen. The long night gradually passed, and a trace of white appeared on the eastern horizon. When the first ray of sunlight shone on Zhongling Mountain, the ferocious beast roars that constantly spread throughout Zhongling Mountain slowly quieted down, and the terrifying pressure also weakened by many times. Bush, bush, bush. On Zhongling Mountain, figures who were sitting cross-legged slowly stood up. They all knew that the day had arrived, and they should continue climbing towards the top of Zhongling Mountain. Qin Badian also stood up and immediately took out his identity token. When he saw that he was still in 5th place, he sighed lightly. Fortunately, Yuan did not continue climbing last night. Otherwise, the gap of 5 steps would have been directly surpassed. This Zhuowen has not made any movements until now. Perhaps the 1,000th step is his limit. As he thought of this in his heart, Qin Badian did not slow down in the slightest as he continued to climb upwards. However, when his gaze landed on the 4th place, Su Tianliang, he was instantly stunned. Unknowingly, Su Tianliang had already reached the 1150 step, and was not far away from the 3rd place. Zhu Qi, could it be that Su Tianliang was provoked by Zhuowen last night? To actually climb so many steps in the night, I'm afraid that this fellow doesn't have much strength left. Qin Badian quickly thought of the reason why Su Tianliang was so fast and shook his head. However, he was gloating in his heart. Su Tianliang's exhaustion during the night gave him an opportunity. Looks like I'll be able to surpass Su Tianliang today, hee. Chapter 5:12. Beyond Whiz. The sound of clothes rubbing against each other slowly rang out. Zhuowen suddenly opened his eyes and slowly stood up. His pair of sharp eyes were like a lighthouse in the night as he stared straight at the peak of Zhongling Mountain through the dense fog. Perhaps, with the help of its great nirvana sun, I might be able to climb to the peak of Zhongling Mountain. There seems to be something up there that makes my body restless. What exactly is it? When he broke through the 180th acupoint, the blood in Zhuowen's body suddenly boiled. This was a strange yet familiar feeling, and this feeling came from the peak of the mountain. Zhuowen knew that there must be something at the peak of the mountain, something that was extremely important to him. Kid, there will be a great fortune at the peak of the mountain. As for what it is, even I can't completely sense it. However, I know that it will definitely be something extraordinary. Xiao Hei, who was in the sea of consciousness, said quietly, "Great fortune? I will definitely climb to the peak of the mountain." Zhuowen's eyes were filled with determination as he silently tossed out these words. He suddenly took a step forward, and with an extremely fast speed, he ascended step by step towards the peak of Zhongling Mountain. The crisp sound of his footsteps lingered on the stairs that were shrouded in fog. That Zhuowen is moving again. Why is his speed even faster than last night? What kind of speed is this? The moment Zhuowen took a step forward, many of the leaders of the forces on the platform at the top of the mountain were finally in an uproar. The shock that Zhuowen gave them last night was too intense, so many people guessed that the 1,000th step should be Zhuowen's limit. There were even many people who thought that Zhuowen did not have much strength left to stay on Zhongling Mountain. Now that Zhuowen had moved, all the leaders of the forces stared straight at Zhuowen's name. They really wanted to see where the limit of Zhuowen, who had crossed 500 steps last night, was. However, The moment Zhuowen made his move, all the leaders, including the 5 magnates, were stunned. This was because Zhuowen's speed had reached an insane level. In the blink of an eye, he had climbed 5 or 6 steps. This speed was even faster than Zhuowen's climbing speed last night. Didn't they say that every 1,000 steps of Zhongling Mountain would cause a qualitative change? Why is Zhuowen's speed increasing instead of decreasing? Finally, someone couldn't help but ask. At the same time, he asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Could it be that Zhuowen had been hiding his strength all this time, and now he had revealed it all? But this was a little unrealistic. If Zhuowen was really that strong, then he wouldn't have been in such a sorry state when he fought with the everlasting old man, and he wouldn't have been hit by the resentful ghost curse talisman. I'm afraid it's possible that Zhuowen has continuously broken through in Zhongling Mountain. Finally, Lu Nantian couldn't help but voice his opinion. He was very clear about Zhuowen's strength, and he had even checked Zhuowen's strength before. He knew that Zhuowen's strength was indeed only at the peak of the second wheel Ultimate Emperor realm. However, the speed Zhuowen was displaying right now didn't seem like a level that a second wheel Ultimate Emperor realm cultivator could achieve. Only a third wheel Ultimate Emperor realm cultivator could achieve this. Since this was the case, Lu Nantian knew that Zhuowen hadn't been hiding his strength from the beginning. He had broken through in Zhongling Mountain, which was why he was able to display such terrifying speed. This Zhuowen's talent is truly terrifying. He was actually able to break through in Zhongling Mountain, which is filled with pressure. Thinking of this possibility, Lu Nantian couldn't help but praise Zhuowen. He liked and valued this kind of genius more and more. This kid had the potential to catch up to the 5 great geniuses. The other 4 magnates were also moved. If what Lu Nantian said was true, and Zhuowen was actually able to break through in such a harsh environment as Zhongling Mountain, then this Zhuowen's talent was truly terrifying. Su Chang's eyes were gloomy as he looked at the constantly rising light spots in the golden pagoda. His heart was filled with dense killing intent. He knew that this kind of genius was growing too quickly. If he wasn't killed in the cradle, then he would definitely be a disaster in the future. He's surpassed him. This Zhuowen's speed is too fast. He actually surpassed the 5th place Qin Badian. Now, he's already in 5th place, and he's not far from Su Tianliang. With this speed, I'm afraid that Zhuowen will soon catch up to Su Tianliang. Suddenly, there was an uproar on the platform. Everyone looked over and saw that Qin Badian, who was originally in 5th place, had been pushed down to 6th place. As for Zhuowen, he had successfully entered the top 5 and wasn't far from Su Tianliang. Seeing this scene, Mark Yongsheng Qin Ye's mouth twitched, and his face turned ugly. He coldly snorted. This Zhuowen is indeed capable to actually surpass Qin Badian. And this brat Badian, it seems like he's not strict enough. Looks like we'll have to properly train this brat, lest he forgets the principle of being vigilant in times of peace. The moment Qin Ye's words left his mouth, the other 4 magnates could already imagine Qin Baishan's miserable fate after the Origin Qi Pagoda ended. Qin Badian probably wouldn't be able to avoid a vicious beating. Not far from Qin Ye, Su Chang's face also turned ugly. This was because he also saw that the distance between the 5th place Zhuowen and the 4th place Su Tianliang was constantly shrinking. However, the ones being surpassed shouldn't only be the geniuses of our Yongsheng Marquis residence. I'm afraid that Brother Su's brat will also be surpassed. At this moment, Qin Ye suddenly said such a sentence as he looked at Su Chang with a mocking gaze. Although he was unhappy that Qin Badian had been surpassed, since it had already happened, he wouldn't be too jealous of Zhuowen. After all, Zhuowen had openly surpassed Qin Badian, and he wasn't petty about it. Furthermore, from the looks of it, Su Tianliang would also be surpassed by Zhuowen. Qin Ye naturally couldn't wait to have someone accompany him to the grave. Su Tianliang, whose strength was similar to Qin Badian, was naturally the most suitable candidate. Brother Qin, it's too early for you to say that. There's still a gap of 50 steps between Zhuowen and Tianliang. He might not even surpass Tianliang. Su Chang coldly snorted. With Zhuowen's speed, he should be able to surpass you very soon. Brother Su, don't be anxious. Qin Ye said in an eccentric tone. This Su doesn't wish to bicker with you. Su Chang coldly snorted and didn't wish to speak too much with Qin Ye. Instead, he stared at the huge golden tower while his heart was extremely nervous. He naturally didn't wish for Zhuan to surpass Su Tianliang. In Zhongling Mountain, Qin Batian blankly stared at the identity token in his hand. His face was completely pale, and even his body was trembling slightly. This Zhuan actually surpassed me? And his speed is so fast. After being stunned for a moment, Qin Batian bitterly smiled and muttered to himself, "Damn it. This time, I really won't be able to escape a fat beating from father. This Zhuan is actually so abnormal. It's a pity that I didn't pay attention to such a character from the start. But there's still a chance. Looking at this Zhuan's speed, it should be more than enough to surpass Su Tianliang. As long as I surpass Su Tianliang and enter the top 5, perhaps father won't beat me so ruthlessly when I return." As he spoke, Qin Baishan's eyes were filled with determination. In his heart, he hoped that Qin Ye would beat him lightly. Once again, he gathered his emotions and walked up step by step. On the 1,200th step, Su Tianliang was gasping for breath. His pale face revealed a trace of a smile as he coldly chuckled, "This time, I've finally shaken off that Tun and Qin Batian. Hee, it won't be so easy to surpass me." As he spoke, Su Tianliang took out his identity token. He wanted to see how far he had pulled apart Zhuan. How is this possible? This is impossible. When Su Tianliang's gaze focused on the identity token, his body suddenly froze. The smile on his face became extremely stiff because he realized that Zhuan had unknowingly surpassed Qin Batian and entered the 5th place. Furthermore, the distance between him and Qin Batian was only less than 50 steps. This reality instantly caused Su Tianliang to feel as if he was struck by lightning as his mind went blank. Impossible! I will not be surpassed by that little bastard Zhuan, absolutely not. With a low roar, Su Tianliang seemed to have gone mad as he ferociously strode upwards. He definitely would not be surpassed by Zhuan, absolutely not. How can the fellow who was like a stray dog in my hands surpass me? He must be joking. Dang dang dang. Perhaps it was due to Zhuan's provocation, Su Tianliang's speed actually increased a little. However, compared to Zhuan's current speed, it was simply a drop in the bucket as the distance between the two continued to shrink. This bastard can forget about surpassing me. Break. Su Tianliang roared towards the sky as his speed actually increased by a large margin. However, the increasingly powerful pressure caused his face to become increasingly pale and powerless. There was even a large amount of blood mist seeping out from the surface of his body. 50 steps, 40 steps, 30 steps, 20 steps, 10 steps. The distance between the two was constantly shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the end, Su Tianliang's pupils slightly shrank as he realized that Zhuan's height was actually the same as his. No, I definitely cannot let him surpass me. Step on it for me. Su Tianliang roared in rage as he suddenly stepped on the steps in front of him. In an instant, countless amounts of pressure, like the pressure of the deep sea, surged and crashed onto Su Tianliang's body. Puchi. Su Tianliang only felt that his entire body was filled with a terrifying pressure, as if a huge mountain was pressing down on his back. His entire body was bent over, and a mouthful of blood was violently spat out. Immediately, he directly retreated over 10 steps. After retreating over 10 steps, he finally stabilized his body. As for the light spot that represented Zhuan within the identity token, it rose like a hot knife through butter and instantly surpassed Su Tianliang. Looking at his name falling to 5th place, Su Tianliang seemed to have lost his soul. His depressed mood made him unable to help but roar towards the sky. How is this possible? How could that little bastard Zhuan surpass me? How is this possible? This little bastard must have used some unknown method to achieve such speed. With his strength, how could he surpass me? Chapter 5:13. 1,500 Stepwa. When Zhuan surpassed Su Tianliang and took 4th place, the leaders of the various forces on the platform could no longer suppress the shock in their hearts. The uproar surged like a tidal wave. Su Chang clenched his fists tightly. His eyes bulged as he stared at Su Tianliang on the golden tower. Su Tianliang had been surpassed in the end. You little bastard. Su Chang gritted his teeth. His eyes were filled with gloominess and murderous intent. The other 4 magnates nodded in agreement. Their hearts were filled with astonishment as well. Zhuo Wenjin had surprised them time and time again with unexpected results. Gu Yutian, who was in the crowd, did not know how to express his current feelings. Although he had always been extremely confident in Zhuowen, he only thought that Zhuowen had the strength to enter the top 100. But now, not only had Zhuowen entered the top 100, but he had also entered the top 10 and top 5. He had surpassed Qin Batyin and Su Tianliang of the 5 great geniuses. How could such a result not be shocking and exciting? Lord Gu, your Tengjia city must cooperate with us more in the future. I hope you won't look down on us. That's right. Lord Gu, if you need any help, feel free to look for our city. Although we can't compare to the 5 great geniuses of the province capital, we are still a super city. We can still help with some small matters. Lord Gu, you don't have to be polite with us in the future. If you have any requests, we will definitely do our best to assist you. In an instant, the ordinary Gu Yutian became the focus of everyone on the platform. One by one, the leaders of the super cities showed a humble and courteous attitude towards Gu Yutian. If an outsider were to witness this scene, they would definitely feel that this scene was extremely strange. This was because Gu Yutian was only a small cultivator at the Earth King realm, while the city lords of these super cities were basically ultimate emperor realm powerhouses. Their auras were countless times stronger than Gu Yutian's. But now, these powerful city lords were all enthusiastically greeting Gu Yutian. They all knew that Rattan Armor City was going to prosper because the talent and strength that Zhuan had displayed was no weaker than the 5 super geniuses. In some aspects, he was even stronger. They all knew that the future of such a genius was limitless. With the existence of such a genius, even if Rattan Armor City was only a lowly low-grade city, it would not be a problem to develop into a super city as long as it was given a certain amount of time. Moreover, it would be a super city that was ranked at the top. Gu Yutian was completely flattered. Almost every city lord with a high status on the platform no longer had the trace of arrogance on their faces. Instead, they were warm and courteous. This made Gu Yutian feel very proud and comfortable. After a round of pleasantries, the clamor on the platform also stopped. Everyone's gaze was fixed on the golden tower. At this moment, the light that represented Zhuowen on the tower finally began to slow down. It was likely that even Zhuowen would find it difficult to withstand the increasingly strong pressure. At this moment, the ranking of the golden tower was as follows. First place, LV Tao, 2,700 steps. Second place, Luo Xing, 1,800 steps. Third place, Zhu Qi, 1,555 steps. Fourth place, Zhuowen, 1,400 steps. Fifth place, Su Tianliang, 1,300 steps. Sixth place, Qin Badian, 1,250 steps. The fifth place Su Tianliang and the sixth place Qin Badian were slowly shrinking at an extremely slow speed. The distance between the two was also gradually closing. Clearly, Qin Badian was beginning to exert his strength. Brother Su, looks like your family's Su Tianliang forcefully climbed Zhongling Mountain last night. I'm afraid that he doesn't have much strength left. Who knows, he might not even be able to maintain his 5th place. Seeing Qin Baishan's speed gradually increasing, Qin Ye's mood became a little better. Seeing the gap between Zhuowen and Qin Batian and Su Tianliang widening, he no longer had extravagant hopes that Qin Batian could surpass Zhuowen. However, if he could surpass Su Tianliang and enter the top 5, it wouldn't be too shameful. After all, Qin Baishan's previous results were always 5th place. Brother Qin, you're too confident. Qin Batian and Su Tianliang are separated by more than 50 steps. Do you think that you can catch up with so many steps? Su Chang was a little irritated. Last night, when Su Tianliang desperately climbed Zhongling Mountain, he already knew that something was wrong. Clearly, Su Tianliang was provoked by Zhuowen. Thinking of this, Su Chang's hatred for Zhuowen deepened. Whether I'm confident or not, we'll know when the time comes. Qin Ye said eccentrically. Another 100 steps and I'll be able to reach the 1500 step. I never thought that after the 1000th step, the pressure in Zhongling Mountain would become so terrifying. On the thick and heavy steps, Zhuowen's body was covered in golden light. Golden veins sparkled on the surface of his body. Even though he had opened up 180 acupoints in his body, under this pressure, he still felt a heavy pressure. Sweat poured down like rain, his breathing was rapid, his movements were stiff, and his physical strength was lacking. I must reach the 1500th step. As long as I reach the 1500th step, I can borrow the spiritual qi to break through the great nirvana Sunday. As he spoke, Yuan firmly took one step at a time. Although his speed wasn't fast, it was extremely stable. Luo Xing, who was in second place, and Zhu Qi, who was in third place, finally noticed Zhuowen's name that suddenly appeared. Both of their faces revealed a smear of disbelief. This Zhuowen actually surpassed Qin Batian and Su Tianliang consecutively. Zhu Qi's indifferent face frowned slightly. He snorted coldly and didn't delay any longer. His speed increased slightly as he climbed up. Luo Xing also felt a sense of urgency. Zhuowen's speed of improvement was even faster than Zhu Qi's. The two of them couldn't figure out how Zhuowen had managed to reach fourth place. After all, Zhuowen had only been a second-wheel Ultimate Emperor Realm Cultivator when they'd entered the third level. Although Zhuowen had mental power at the peak of the fourth grade lower tier, his strength shouldn't have surpassed Qin Batian and Su Tianliang's level. In fact, they never thought that the great nirvana sun that Zhuowen cultivated would increase his physical strength to such an abnormal degree. Although Zhuowen's current strength might not be a match for Su Tianliang, his strong physical strength gave him an extremely strong resistance. In front of Zhuowen's strong physical strength, the pressure of Zhongling Mountain wasn't much of a hindrance. In fact, Zhuowen didn't even need to waste the power of heaven and earth in his body to resist the pressure of Zhongling Mountain. Therefore, Zhuowen's exhaustion in Zhongling Mountain was much less than in ordinary warriors. This was the advantage of having a strong physical body. Dang dang dang. The crisp sound of footsteps slowly rang out. As Zhuowen continued to move forward, he got closer and closer to the 1500th step. Of course, the pressure was also getting more and more terrifying. Almost there. I just need to hold on a little longer. Withstanding the huge pressure, even if the skin on his body was cracking, Zhuowen still continued to move forward unwaveringly. Finally, just as Zhuowen couldn't hold on any longer, Zhuowen finally reached the 1500th step. Just as he had guessed, the pressure on this step was much weaker than the other steps. Therefore, he felt rather relaxed now. Silently sitting cross-legged on the step, Zhuowen began to recover his strength and began to absorb the spiritual energy in the step. It had been 5 days since the opening of Zhongling Mountain. In these 5 days, many warriors couldn't withstand the pressure of Zhongling Mountain and directly used their identity tokens to leave Zhongling Mountain. Of course, those warriors who were ranked outside the top 100 and had given up on climbing Zhongling Mountain had basically been quietly eliminated by the Yuan Qi Tower. Time flew by quickly and another 3 days passed. Most of the warriors on Zhongling Mountain had already left Zhongling Mountain and were teleported to the huge square outside Zhongling Mountain. There were only 7 warriors left on Zhongling Mountain. They were the top 7, LV Tao, Luo Xing, Zhu Qi, Zhuowen, Qin Batian, Su Tianliang, and Ling Wushuang. Their rankings were as follows. First place, LV Tao, 3,500 step. Second place, Luo Xing, 1,900 step. Third place, Zhu Qi, 1,670 steps. Fourth place, Zhuowen, 1,500 step. Fifth place, Qin Batian, 1,420 steps. Sixth place, Su Tianliang, 1,380 steps. Seventh place, Ling Wushuang, 970 steps. Among them, because Su Tianliang had charged too fiercely during the previous night, he had exhausted too much of his energy and was eventually overtaken by Qin Batian. At that time, Qin Ye was overjoyed and couldn't stop smiling. As for Su Chang, his expression was extremely ugly. Su Tianliang's ranking falling out of the top 5 was really unexpected. What puzzled everyone was that ever since Zhuowen had stepped onto the 1500th step 3 days ago, he had been motionless. Such an abnormal performance made many people speculate. On the 990th step of Zhongling Mountain, the heroic Ling Wushuang wiped the sweat on her forehead. Her beautiful eyes stared at the 1000th step as she muttered to herself, "I have also reached my limit. In my current state, it will be very difficult to cross the 1000th step." Lightly sighing, she was very clear about her own strength. She took out her identity token and stared at the 4th place, Zhuan, with a strange color in her beautiful eyes. She had always been curious. How did this young man called Zhuan, who came from a low-grade city, cultivate? He was actually able to suppress the two geniuses, Su Tianliang and Qin Badian, and squeeze into the 4th place. I, Ling Wushuang, rarely admire others. However, this one really makes me admire him. To be able to walk from a low-grade city to where he is now, he must have suffered a lot to be able to have his current achievements. Lightly sighing, Ling Wushuang took out her identity token and formed a seal. Shortly after, a pillar of light descended from the sky and completely enveloped her. Yuan, I really want to see what your limit is because my intuition tells me that you are definitely not only in the 4th place. Chapter 5:14. Second place LV Tao is really too terrifying. He's far ahead of everyone. Even the 2nd place, Luo Xing, is behind him by more than 1,600 steps. Now, there were only 6 people left on Zhongling Mountain. Ling Wushuang had already taken the initiative to leave Zhongling Mountain. Among them, the most dazzling one was undoubtedly LV Tao, who was ranked first. He had reached a terrifying height of more than 3,000 steps. Even the leaders of the various forces on the platform felt a wave of pressure. Lu Nanshan's expression was extremely calm. He wasn't surprised that LV Tao could achieve such a result. Furthermore, he knew that LV Tao's ultimate goal wasn't only to be first place, but also to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. How high is Zhongling Mountain? Even I don't know. 100 years ago, in the previous Origin Qi Tower battle, my big brother, Lu Hantian, had climbed more than 9,000 steps, but he still didn't reach the peak. Looking at LV Tao, who was ranked first in the Golden Tower, Lu Nantian shook his head slightly. He was very clear about LV Tao's arrogance, but to climb to the peak of Zhongling Mountain was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. I wonder if Yi Tao can break the previous record. Perhaps the peak of the mountain is located above the 10,000 steps of Zhongling Mountain. If he can cross the 10,000 steps, he might be able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Lu Nantian muttered in his heart. He was very clear about how difficult it was to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. In fact, he wasn't very optimistic about LV Tao. Damn it. Damn it. Even Qin Badian has surpassed me. What should I do now? Last time, I spent too much energy climbing at night. Right now, I don't have any extra energy to take another step. Su Tianyang was panting at this moment. His physical strength was lacking. He stopped on the steps with a gloomy expression. Right now, he didn't have much energy in his body. If he continued, he was afraid that he would really suffer internal injuries. It's all Zhuowen's fault. Zhuowen, you bastard, just you wait. When we reach the 4th level, I'll make you die a horrible death. After fiercely cursing, Su Tianliang's eyes flickered. Finally, he gritted his teeth and took out his identity token. Shortly after, he turned into a beam of light and disappeared from Zhongling Mountain. But Su Tianliang actually gave up? Qin Badian, who was ranked 5th, immediately sensed Su Tianliang's departure. Retrieving his identity token, he stared at Zhuowen, who was still standing on the 1,500th step as a bitter smile surfaced on his face. Although he was already extremely close to Zhuowen, only 50 steps away, he had basically used up all his energy. He knew that in his current state, it was impossible for him to cross the remaining 50 steps and surpass Zhuowen. Forget it. Forget it. It's not bad to be able to enter the 5th place. Father shouldn't beat me up. After mumbling to himself for a while, Qin Badian took out his identity token and left Zhongling Mountain. From then on, only LV Tao, Luo Xing, Zhu Qi and Zhuowen were left on Zhongling Mountain. Among them, LV Tao had pulled a large distance away from the remaining 3. On the 1,500th step, Yuan, who was sitting cross-legged, suddenly stood up. His entire body overflowed with golden light, and he was like a god that had descended to the mortal world, solemn and divine. I've already opened 200 acupuncture points. With the current strength of my physical body and my own heaven and earth energy, entering the 2000 step shouldn't be a problem. With a faint smile on his face, Zhuan retrieved his identity token. To his surprise, there were only 4 people left on Zhongling Mountain. They were LV Tao, Luo Xing, Zhu Qi, and himself. Among them, LV Tao's speed was unbelievably fast and had already reached the 4000 step. The second place, Luo Xing, was much slower, only at the 1900 step. The third place, Zhu Qi, was only at the 1700 step. The difference between the second and third place wasn't that great. That LV Tao is probably also rushing towards the peak of Zhongling Mountain? After muttering to himself, Zhuowen's feet suddenly stepped out and he steadily continued to advance upwards. Although his speed was not as abnormally terrifying as before, it was still much faster than Zhu Qi and Luo Xing, who were in front of him. Zhuan is moving. How can he still maintain such a speed? He's actually so much faster than Luo Xing and Zhu Qi. If he continues to maintain this speed, wouldn't it be an established fact that Zhuan has surpassed Zhu Qi and Luo Xing? The moment Zhuan moved, the crowd on the platform suddenly burst into an uproar. Especially when they saw Zhuowen's steady speed, everyone on the platform was fiercely shocked. Boom, boom, boom. At this moment, Zhuowen's face was calm and he had a smile on his face. Golden veins covered his entire body. Whenever pressure descended on his body, the golden veins were like small snakes that resisted the pressure. In an hour, Yuan had consecutively climbed 100 steps and reached the 1600 step. After another hour, Yuan had reached the 1700 step. At this moment, Zhu Qi was still at the 1760th step. Zhuan, when did he reach the 1700 step? Zhu Qi finally realized that something was wrong and hurriedly took out his identity token to check. He immediately discovered that Zhuan was gradually approaching him. His originally cold face finally revealed a shocked expression. I can't let him surpass me. Zhu Qi's heart was filled with coldness. He hurriedly adjusted his state of mind and began to speed up. However, the pressure of the 1700 step was too terrifying. It was already difficult enough for him to walk slowly, let alone speed up. After walking a few steps, Zhu Qi was already panting. The light that represented Zhuan was only 10 steps away from him. 5th step, 7th step, 5th step, 3rd step, 1st step. Soon after, Zhu Qi's pupils violently shrank as he discovered that Zhuan had actually surpassed him without the slightest hesitation. This guy, the powerful pressure and the depression in his heart finally caused Zhu Qi to involuntarily spit out a mouthful of blood. His face was incomparably red. This Zhuan has indeed surpassed Zhu Qi now. He is already in 3rd place. Moreover, it seems that his speed is not showing any signs of slowing down. On the platform, many of the leaders of the forces were already somewhat numb. Zhuan's performance really made them speechless. Moreover, they did not know what to say. They could only silently watch as Zhuan continued to advance step by step. On the other hand, Xinyuan Li of the Imperial Sword sect rubbed his head. His expression was slightly unnatural. Initially, he was extremely interested in Zhuan. However, he would never have thought that this Zhuan would grow so quickly. In Zhongling Mountain, even Zhuowen's ranking had been pushed down by Zhuan. As for the numerous warriors who were teleported out of Zhongling Mountain, they were all stunned as they stared at Zhuan, who was already in 3rd place. The entire place was silent for a long time. This time, the target is the 2000th step. At this time, Zhuan had already reached the 1800th step. At this time, the pressure had already become extremely terrifying. Zhuowen's speed had also become much slower. However, he was still constantly pulling the distance between him and Luo Xing, who was in 2nd place. Break through for me. Open all 200 acupuncture points for Maine. With a low shout, Zhuowen's entire body flashed with a golden light. In an instant, the 200 acupuncture points in his body opened at the same time. A surge of power filled Zhuowen's body. Dang dang dang. Zhuowen's speed increased by a large margin. In 10 breaths' time, he had actually reached the 1,900 step. He was only 20 steps away from Luo Xing, who was in front of him. In fact, Luo Xing had already noticed that Zhuon was getting closer and closer. At this time, her gaze was extremely calm. She muttered in a low voice, "I'm afraid my limit is the 2,000 step. If this Zhuon can reach the 2,000 step, I think I can give up." As he said that, Luo Xing suddenly clenched his hands. The starlight around him spread out and scattered into his body. Immediately, the aura in his body surged out. I really didn't expect that in the end, I would have to use a secret technique like the Star Mantra to support the pressure of Zhongling Mountain. Zhuon, if you can enter the 2,000 step, then I will really lose. With a low sigh, Luo Xing gently lifted her jade-like feet and her speed actually soared to the limit. In an instant, she crossed the many steps and only used 5 breaths' time to reach the 2,000 step. Standing on the 2,000 step, Luo Xing silently glanced at the light that represented Zhuon in the identity badge. Then he left Zhongling Mountain without hesitation. The Star Mantra was a secret technique and had a time limit. Moreover, once the time limit was over, there would be a backlash. Therefore, after Luo Xing stepped out of the limit, he straightforwardly left Zhongling Mountain. The moment Luo Xing left Zhongling Mountain, Zhu Qi, who was still behind Zhuon, let out a loud roar. His roar was filled with unwillingness, and in the end, he also left Zhongling Mountain after Luo Xing. At this point, only Zhuon and LV Tao were still walking in the entire Zhongling Mountain. Tap tap tap. Zhuowen's speed became slower and slower, but in the end, he still reached the 2,000 step. After reaching the 2,000 step, Yun silently sat down cross-legged and began to adjust his body, preparing to absorb the spirit energy in the steps. Zhuon believed that he, who had seen through the secret of Zhongling Mountain, already had the possibility of reaching the peak of the mountain. Therefore, he was filled with ambition. When Zhuon finally reached the 2,000 step, regardless of whether it was the masters of the forces on the platform or the other martial warriors on the plaza, they all set off in uproar. This Zhuon has also reached the 2,000 step. It seems that he is tied with Luo Xing for second place. The master of the meteorite frowned slightly. I'm afraid not. Although this Zhuon is now at the 2,000 step, he has not left Zhongling Mountain. This means that this boy still has the possibility of moving forward. Wasn't this the case for the previous few times? LV Nantian suddenly said seriously. Hearing this, the master of the meteorite also fell silent. LV Nantian was right. In the previous few times, Yun had also stayed on a step for a long time, but when he moved again, his speed always surprised everyone. Hey, what kind of freak is this Yun? He even surpassed Luo Xing. Is this boy's strength now stronger than Luo Xing? The master of the meteorite said with some disappointment. The pressure of Zhongling Mountain is not necessarily the higher the strength, the higher the climb. Strength does have a certain effect of resisting the pressure, but the physical strength can also resist the pressure of Zhongling Mountain. This Zhuon has a powerful body refining technique, I can feel it. LV Nantian shook his head. Chapter 5:15. LV Itao's exertion. The pitch-black curtain of night was like a black dragon that covered the sky. It stretched across the entire sky, as if the sky was covered by a layer of ink. It was dark and mysterious, distant and continuous. Roar, roar, roar. Terrifying and mournful roars once again resounded throughout the entire Zhongling Mountain. The valiant pressure suddenly increased by several times, as if a towering mountain had suddenly appeared on one's back. Dang dang dang. Clear and steady footsteps resounded from one of the stairs. An elegant and indifferent white figure had his hands behind his back. A faint smile hung at the corner of his mouth. His footsteps were firm and steady as he continuously walked on the stairs. The terrifying beast roars and the pressure of the curtain of night seemed to have no effect on this elegant white-clothed youth. His footsteps did not stop because of this. Boom! When the white-clothed youth took another step, his advancing figure faintly trembled. Soon after, he returned to his original state. He frowned slightly as he stared at the endless lingering fog in front of him. he said indifferently, unknowingly, I have already reached the 5,000th step? I never imagined that the pressure after the 5,000th step would actually undergo a qualitative change. Furthermore, it is currently nighttime. The pressure after the 5,000th step is even more terrifying. Looks like it is not suitable to travel at night. The white-clothed youth muttered to himself for a moment. He directly sat down on the 5,000th step, revealing an extremely indifferent face. It was Lv Tao, who was ranked first in the Zhongling Mountain by a large margin. In this Zhongling Mountain, the pressure of every 500 steps is always weaker than the other steps. Could it be that it is specially used to allow the participants to enter the Zhongling Mountain to rest? Lv Tao, who was in the lead by so much, had long noticed the strange situation of every 500 steps. However, he was not like Xiao He, who had a powerful spiritual sense and rich experience. He simply did not think that there was a great opportunity in this step. He only thought that this step, which had a weak pressure, was used by the cultivators to rest. It has already been 6 days since I entered the Zhongling Mountain. According to past experience, the other participants should not be able to endure in this Zhongling Mountain and should have been sent out. For the past 6 days, Lv Tao had been climbing Zhongling Mountain. With his arrogant personality, he didn't even bother to look at the situation of the other contestants in his identity token. This was because he knew that first place could only belong to him. This was the first time he had stopped at Zhongling Mountain. Since he had nothing to do, he habitually took out his identity token. Lv Tao saw that the 1,000 dazzling light spots in the token had all dimmed. Other than the light spot that represented himself, Lv Tao did not see the existence of any other light spots. However, his gaze soon landed on the second light spot. There was a light spot that was as dazzling as the moon. It was rising slowly, and it was dazzling in Lv Tao's eyes at this moment. There was actually someone who had persisted in Zhongling Mountain for 6 days? Looks like it's little sister Luo Xing. To be able to survive for 6 days in Zhongling Mountain, little sister Luo Xing is indeed not simple. No wonder even Lord Father once had such a high opinion of her. Thinking of that elegant and indifferent peerless woman, Lv Tao's indifferent gaze flickered with a trace of fluctuation. When his smiling gaze focused on this light spot, his entire body was suddenly stunned, and even a little stunned. This was because the dazzling light spot that was as dazzling as the moon did not represent the Jade Lady Star Court, but Tuan, whom he had never taken seriously. Finally, Lv Tao's indifferent expression, which had been maintained from the beginning, finally changed. It became astonishment and disbelief. It's actually him. This Yuan has actually been promoted to the second place, and he has persisted for 6 days. Muttering softly, Lv Tao's face suddenly became serious. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he said indifferently, "What a surprising kid. He has persisted for 6 days in Zhongling Mountain and has finally been promoted to the second place. It seems that this kid is indeed not simple. However, it's nothing to me. I will let him see the difference between a so-called genius and a real genius." Lv Tao's eyes flickered, and he closed his eyes slightly and began to quietly recuperate. This Yuan was indeed not bad for being able to persist for 6 days, but for him, this was still not enough. Or rather, all the geniuses participating in the Tower of Vitality were not qualified for him. His goal was to climb to the top of Zhongling Mountain. As for the so-called ranking, it meant little to him, because to some extent, he was already standing at the peak of all the younger generation of cultivators, because the first place would inevitably be his. Even if this Zhuoan still existed, it would still not have any impact on his position, because in his opinion, no matter how long this Zhuoan stayed in Zhongling Mountain, he would not pose the slightest threat to him. While speaking, Lv Tao began to try his best to recover his energy so that he could cope with the pressure of Zhongling Mountain tomorrow. On the 2000th step, Zhuoan's entire body surged with golden light, and the sound of bones rubbing against each other constantly resounded, like countless bombs exploding. Under the stimulation of spirit qi, each and every one of his acupuncture points bloomed like leaves sprouting. 181st, 182nd, 190th, 195th, 200, As one acupuncture point after another was opened, the aura in Zhuowen's body erupted like a wild beast, and the meridians in his limbs and bones were dyed golden, looking extremely terrifying and valiant. Time gradually passed, and in the blink of an eye, the long night had passed, and the first ray of sunlight shone on the horizon. When the first ray of sunlight shone down, Elvitao, who was dressed in a white robe, slowly stood up. Dang dang dang. Slowly taking a step forward, Elvitao continued to walk towards Zhongling Mountain. As for the identity token, he did not look at it again, because in his opinion, Yuan was simply not on the same level as him. Right now, he had already climbed to the 5,000 step, and Jun was only at the 2,000 step. There was a gap of 3,000 steps, and even if Zhuowen's strength was not much different from his, it was impossible for him to catch up. In fact, Zhuowen's strength was much weaker than his. With such a huge gap, how could it be shortened? As far as he was concerned, it was impossible for Zhuowen to catch up to him, so he simply stopped paying attention to Zhuowen. Right now, Jun was like a clown in his eyes, insignificant, and there was no need for him to be distracted by this person. After all, his goal was the peak of Zhongling Mountain. When Lvetao set off, Tuan, who was standing at the 2,000 step, suddenly opened his eyes. A rich golden light filled his eyes, and a rich aura burst out from his body like a tide. Boom! Wisps of transparent mind power circled around Zhuowen, lifting his body up. I have already opened 200 acupoints, and my mental strength has also advanced from the peak of rank 4 lower realm to rank 4 upper realm. Right now, relying on the strength of my physical body and mental strength, I'm afraid that even 3 Ultimate Emperor Realm warriors may not be my match, right? At this moment, Zhuowen's face was full of confidence. With his current strength, if he were to face Su Tianliang, although he might not be able to defeat the latter, he could already contend with him. Zhongling Mountain is indeed a place of good fortune for me. Here, my strength will increase tremendously. Right now, I am no longer afraid of a genius like Su Tianliang. Zhuowen's face revealed a carefree smile. He knew that his strength had finally squeezed into the top combat strength of the younger generation of warriors in Muqing County. Let's go. Let's go to the 2,500 step. This time, I must complete the beginner level of the Nirvana of the Great Sun in Zhongling Mountain. Slowly standing up, Zhuan suddenly took a step forward and directly stepped up. His steps were firm and full of confidence. Time passed day by day. In the blink of an eye, another 5 days had passed. In these 5 days, Elvitao had reached the 7,000 step from the 5,000 step. However, after reaching the 7,000 step, Lvetao clearly felt that the pressure around him had caused a certain degree of threat to him. Humph! It's only the 7,000 step. Father once said that Lu Hantian had reached the 9,000 step, but he did not reach the peak. This means that the peak of Zhongling Mountain should be around the 10,000 step. As long as I reach the 10,000 step, then I will create a record for Zhongling Mountain. At the same time, I will also surpass Lu Hantian, who was once extremely famous in the house of Marquis Qin. Now, Lvetao's face was no longer indifferent, but full of seriousness. He knew that from now on he had to be serious. Otherwise, it would be really difficult to reach the peak. Step over it for me. With a low roar, a terrifying aura burst out from Lvetao's body like a tide. The powerful aura even caused the surrounding space to distort. Countless cyclones wrapped around his body. Dang dang dang. In just an instant, Lvetao's speed suddenly increased. It was much faster than before. Like a rocket, he directly rushed towards the 8,000 step. While Lvetao was rushing towards the 8,000 step, Jun was still slowly absorbing the spiritual energy on the 3,000 step. His strength was also constantly increasing under the nourishment of the spiritual energy. Jun was not in a hurry to climb. The current him was thinking of all ways to increase his strength. Moreover, Zhongling Mountain originally did not have a time limit. As long as he could withstand the pressure inside, he could continue to stay. Although Zhuan was quite shocked by Lvetao's sudden rush, he did not belittle himself. Instead, he steadily increased his strength. This was because he knew how big the gap between him and Lvetao was. Right now, being impatient would not allow him to eat hot tofu. When LV Tao started his rush, regardless of whether it was the masters of the major forces on the platform or the many genius warriors in the square outside Zhongling Mountain, all of their gazes gathered on LV Tao's light spot. Shock spread in everyone's hearts. Is LV Tao only getting serious now? He can still make such a rush on the 7,000 step. This guy is too terrifying. I'm afraid that LV Tao is very likely to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. It is said that there is a great opportunity at the peak. LV Tao is probably rushing towards the peak. The uproar was like an avalanche. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the light spot that represented LV Tao. They wanted to see if LV Tao could reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Chapter 5:16. 9,000 steps, 7,100 steps, 7,200 steps, 7,300 steps, 7,800 steps, 7,900 steps. At this moment, whether it was the leaders of the various forces on the platform or the many genius cultivators on the square, they all stared fixedly at the dot of light that represented LV Tao. Everyone's eyes were filled with excitement and shock. It's already 7,900 steps, but LV Tao doesn't seem to have slowed down at all. That's a little too abnormal. As expected of the #1 expert of the younger generation in Muqin County, he's actually far ahead of the person in second place by almost 5,000 steps. The difference is really huge. That Zhuan is actually not bad. It's already extremely terrifying to be able to reach 3,000 steps. However, LV Tao is too terrifying. He's actually able to reach such a height. Countless uproars rang out on the platform and square. After witnessing LV Tao's terrifying performance, Zhuowen's stunning performance from before seemed insignificant. At this moment, LV Tao was several streets ahead of Zhuowen in both speed and height. Look, LV Tao has reached the 8,000 step. He's so fast. It's only been half a day, but he's already crossed the 1,000 step and reached the 8,000 step. This LV Tao is truly shocking. No one knew who shouted, but the geniuses in the square all burst into an uproar. They were all shocked by LV Tao's terrifying performance. In the most spacious corner of the plaza, Luo Xing, Zhu Qi, Qin Badian, and Su Tonliang silently stood there. The four of them stared at the identity token in their hands as shock appeared on their faces. Brother LV has really hidden his strength well. I originally thought that the difference between us wasn't that great, but now it looks like it's like the difference between heaven and earth. Zhu Qi's scarlet eyes flickered when he saw LV Tao reach the 8,000 step. He sighed softly and couldn't help but reveal a look of admiration on his face. The other three didn't say anything, but it was clear from their expressions that they were completely convinced of LV Tao's strength. Although it was rumored that LV Tao had only recently ascended to the Ultimate Emperor realm, the strength and results that LV Tao had displayed were probably even more terrifying than an ordinary Ultimate Emperor realm expert. But what qualifications does that little bastard Zhuowen have to be second place? This little bastard must have taken advantage of this Zhongling Mountain. Suddenly, Su Tianliang's gaze condensed on the light spot of the second place, and he coldly snorted with a gloomy expression. This one is indeed a little strange. Didn't you notice that every time that kid crossed the 500 step, he would deliberately stop for a period of time? In other words, there must be some kind of secret or shortcut in Zhongling Mountain, and it just so happened that this Zhuowen discovered it. Zhu Qi's scarlet eyes flickered and a trace of coldness appeared on his face. Obviously, Zhu Qi was extremely displeased that Zhun, who he had never taken seriously, had surpassed him. What you said is possible. When this Zhuowen entered Zhongling Mountain, his cultivation was only at the Ultimate Emperor realm. Even if he has the mental power of an initial grade 4, it's unlikely that he could compete with us, let alone surpass us. Moreover, I don't believe that this kid could have made consecutive breakthroughs in Zhongling Mountain. The most likely possibility is that this kid took advantage of the opportunity. Qin Batian nodded in agreement. Although the best explanation for Zhuowen's situation was that he had made consecutive breakthroughs, they were all very clear that the environment of Zhongling Mountain was too harsh. A cultivator wouldn't be able to cultivate in peace, let alone make a breakthrough. It was simply impossible. Luo Xing didn't say anything, but her beautiful eyes flickered slightly. Her line of sight secretly glanced at the light spot that represented Zhuan in the token. No one knew what she was thinking. Brother Qin, Brother Zhu. For this Zhuan to be able to climb so high in Zhongling Mountain, there must be a big secret in his body. After Zhongling Mountain is over, we will go to the 4th level to fight for the ancient inheritance. How about we get rid of this Zhuan first? At that time, the secret on his body will be divided equally between the 3 of us. Su Tianliang rolled his eyes and suddenly greeted Zhu Qi and Qin Batian with a warm attitude. You plan to deal with this Zhuan? Hearing this, Zhu Qi's scarlet eyes flashed and his face showed a hint of interest. In his opinion, Zhuan was able to climb so high because of his secret, not his strength. In the end, in his opinion, this Zhuan was simply an insignificant person. The reason why he was able to surpass him in Zhongling Mountain was only because of luck. This Zhuan is indeed interesting. If Brother Su is willing to take the lead, this Zhu is naturally willing to cooperate with you. Zhu Qi wasn't an idiot. Although he could freely act on the 4th level, he wouldn't be the one to take the lead. After all, Lu Nantian was extremely strict with the rules, so he still needed Su Tianliang to take the lead. Su Tianliang's face slightly changed. How could he not understand Zhu Qi's meaning? The latter wanted him to take the lead. If Brother Zhu can help me get rid of this Zhuan, what's wrong with me taking the lead? Su Tianliang smiled faintly, but his eyes were filled with coldness. Then what does Brother Qin think? As he spoke, Su Tianliang's gaze fell on Qin Batian. I won't get involved in this matter. If you guys want to get rid of that Zhuan, go ahead. Don't drag me in. Qin Batian shook his head. Qin Batian faintly felt that Zhuan wasn't simple, so he didn't plan to join forces with Su Tianliang to deal with that Zhuan. After all, he had no enmity with Zhuan. Luo Xing, who was not far away, heard Su Tianliang's words clearly. Especially when she heard that they wanted to deal with Zhuan, Luo Xing frowned and wanted to speak up to stop them. However, when she thought of the scene when Zhuan rejected her invitation, Luo Xing felt an inexplicable discomfort in her heart. In the end, she didn't speak up and maintained her silence. Time slowly passed, and another 2 days passed. Since LV Tao climbed to the 8,000 step, he had stayed on the 8,000 step for 2 days. Obviously, the next step was quite difficult for him. At this moment, he was silently recuperating. During these 2 days, Zhuan still did what he was supposed to do in Zhongling Mountain. Relying on the rule of the 500 steps, Zhuan would absorb a limited amount of spirit qi in Zhongling Mountain every time. Then, he would silently climb to the 500 steps and repeatedly absorb spirit qi to increase the number of acupoints in his body. 2 days had allowed him to reach the 4,000 step. Such a height was enough to shock everyone. After all, Zhuan was only an unknown genius. Anyone would find it inconceivable that he could reach such a height. Unfortunately, everyone's eyes were no longer on Zhuan. Instead, they were focused on the light spot represented by LV Tao. They all knew that LV Tao was the most promising person to reach the top of Zhongling Mountain in so many rounds of the Tower of Vitality battle. They knew that they were likely to witness the birth of a new record. Everyone knew that the highest record of Zhongling Mountain was set by the number 1 genius of the previous Tower of Vitality battle, LV Hantian. At that time, LV Hantian had reached the 9,999th step of Zhongling Mountain. He was only 1 step away from the summit. However, this last step was the most terrifying step in Zhongling Mountain. Even the talented LV Hantian couldn't withstand this last step and had no fate with the summit. But now, another genius who was comparable to LV Hantian had appeared. That was the number 1 genius of the House of Marquis Qin, LV Tao. He was also LV Hantian's junior. Everyone wanted to see if LV Tao could break LV Hantian's record. LV Tao moved. After resting for 2 days, LV Tao finally moved. Moreover, his speed wasn't slow. He's really too strong. The pressure of 8,000 steps should be extremely terrifying. LV Tao can withstand this pressure and move so fast. He's really heaven-defying. When the light spot representing LV Tao finally moved, everyone's hearts seemed to be seized. Their eyes were fixed on LV Tao's light spot. On the summit, slightly heavy footsteps slowly reverberated on the stairs. The indifferent expression on LV Tao's face had long disappeared and was replaced by an extremely solemn expression. The pressure after 8,000 steps had reached an extremely terrifying level. It was as if thousands of mountains were pressing down on one's spine. No matter how confident LV Tao was, he didn't dare to walk at night. He only dared to walk during the day when he had cultivated to the peak. I will definitely be able to break Lu Hantian's record and reach the top of the mountain. There, I will be able to transform and obtain the power I want. The sound of heavy breathing continued to ring out. LV Tao's expression was firm as he strode forward. His gaze pierced through the heavy fog and focused on the peak of the mountain. There, the towering stone statue became even clearer. He wanted to see what the stone statue on the peak of the mountain looked like. What did it look like? What was its origin? 8,100 steps, 8,200 steps, 8,300 steps, 8,500 steps, 8,700 steps. Slowly, LV Tao steadily moved towards the 9,000 step. He knew that as long as he reached the 9,000 step, he would be able to have a good rest and readjust his state. Step over. I must reach the 9,000 step, I must. With a low shout, the aura in LV Tao's body suddenly soared several times. His speed also increased sharply. He directly crossed the 8,900 steps and reached the 9,000 step. Gently exhaling, LV Tao's face revealed a trace of relief. He smiled and said, I've finally reached the 9,000 step. I only need to recuperate on this step for a few days and readjust my state to the peak. Then, I will be able to sprint towards the last 1,000 steps. I wonder if Zhuan has left Zhongling Mountain? I think he shouldn't be able to hold on. After all, it has already been 10 days. With his strength, it's unlikely that he can hold on for so long. As he spoke, LV Tao took out an identity token from his bosom. His gaze gathered on the light spot in second place. Immediately, LV Tao's expression stiffened. This was because he discovered that the light spot in second place had not dimmed. Chapter 517. Ignore second, Tuan, 5,000 step. LV Tao's originally indifferent expression also became slightly solemn. He also did not expect that Zhuowen was actually still able to endure the pressure of Zhongling Mountain after more than 10 days. Moreover, he had even climbed to the 5,000 step. He does have some ability to actually reach the 5,000 step. Although this Zhuowenluan's strength isn't high, his potential is really very strong. I really didn't expect that a mere brat from a low-level city would actually have such powerful potential. LV Tao muttered to himself. Soon after, his eyes narrowed as he said in an indifferent voice, however, the 5,000 step is still not enough. It's far from enough. Although you've surpassed Luo Xing, Zhu Qi, Su Tianliang and Qin Batin, I, LV Tao, am not someone you can surpass. After he finished speaking, LV Tao closed his eyes. His face was still extremely calm. However, his slightly trembling eyelids revealed his current feelings. Clearly, LV Tao's true emotions were not as calm as he had said. He had already felt a trace of a threatening aura from the light that Zhuowen represented. This was the first time LV Tao had felt such a feeling ever since he became sensible. Ever since he was young, he was fully deserving of the title of Heaven's Pride. His pride, his conceit and even his condescension were all due to his powerful strength and talent. It was because he had the capital to be arrogant and conceited, even his condescension. Boom boom boom. On the 5,000 step, Zhuowen slowly opened his eyes. A solid golden glow burst out, like a beautiful pillar of light in the dark night. I've broken through 240 apertures. The further I progress in the great nirvana sun, the more difficult it is to break through the apertures. Even with the help of spiritual qi, I can only break through 10 apertures with the same amount of spiritual qi. A bitter smile appeared at the corner of Zhuowen's mouth. He had also discovered that the more apertures he opened, the more difficult it would be to break through the remaining apertures. In the beginning, Zhuowen could rely on a portion of spiritual qi to break through 20 to 30 apertures. However, he could only break through around 10 apertures now, sometimes even less. However, Yuan had also clearly discovered that although the speed of breaking through apertures had decreased, the more apertures he opened, the more obvious the increase in strength it gave him. Brat. Zhongling Mountain has a total of 10,000 steps. If you want to reach the peak of the mountain, I'm afraid that you still have a long way to go. That LV Itao's strength is indeed not bad. He can actually reach the 9,000 step without relying on the spiritual energy inside. Blackie's voice suddenly sounded in the sea of consciousness, and he was praising LV Itao. Zhuan nodded. He admired LV Itao quite a bit. Just by relying on his own strength, LV Itao was able to reach 9,000 steps. From this, it could be seen just how powerful LV Itao was. However, as long as LV Itao has not completely reached the 10,000 step, then I have the confidence to surpass him. Slowly standing up, Zhuan's eyes were filled with confidence. Although his strength was far from LV Itao's, he could rely on the spiritual qi in Zhongling Mountain to constantly replenish his strength. Moreover, his strength was also subtly increasing. Therefore, as long as Zhuan was given time, he might really be able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Boom, boom, boom. Taking a step forward, Zhuan walked towards the 550th step. His speed was neither fast nor slow, and he maintained a constant speed. Time quietly passed and 3 days had passed. When the first ray of sunlight finally scattered from the sky, LV Itao, who was dressed in white, slowly stood up. He raised his head slightly and stared at the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Today, I must reach the peak of the mountain and look down on all living things from the peak. LV Itao's heart was filled with lofty aspirations. He lifted his foot and then placed it down, slowly walking towards the last 1,000 steps of Zhongling Mountain. At this moment his speed was not fast, and it was even somewhat slow. However, every step he took was very steady, firm, and confident. The pressure of the last 1,000 steps was the most terrifying part of Zhongling Mountain. Even if it was him, if he was not careful, it was very likely that he would be covered with bruises from the pressure. Therefore, he had no choice but to be cautious. Step by step, the crisp sound of footsteps slowly reverberated within the stairs. LV Itao's slender figure also slowly disappeared into the lingering clouds. He moved. LV Itao finally moved. I'm afraid that LV Itao is planning to climb to the peak of Zhongling Mountain today. If he can climb to the peak, then the record that LV Hantian set back then will be broken today. Today, we might witness a miracle. The peak of Zhongling Mountain that has never been climbed before might be done by LV Itao. The moment LV Itao moved, everyone was in an uproar. For 3 days and 3 nights, everyone's gazes were focused on LV Itao. They knew that when LV Itao truly moved, he would most likely head towards the peak of Zhongling Mountain. 9,050 steps. 9,100 steps. 9,150 steps. 9,200 steps. The current LV Itao's speed could be said to be extremely slow. He did not seek speed but stability. As long as he could smoothly pass through the last 1,000 steps, it did not matter if he was slow. 9,250 steps. 9,300 steps. 9,350 steps. 9,400 steps. Time gradually passed. When half of the day had passed, LV Itao had already reached the 9,500 step. Moreover, his speed had already become extremely slow. Clearly, the increasingly terrifying pressure of Zhongling Mountain had already affected LV Itao quite a bit. Otherwise, it would be impossible for his speed to become slower and slower. On the 9,500 step, LV Itao's expression had already become extremely solemn. The pressure here was so strong that it actually faintly affected the blood in his body. With every step he took, he could always feel the blood in his body boiling. His movements also became much slower and heavier. Huff huff huff. A slightly hurried panting sound came from LV Itao's nose. Like an overly tired water buffalo, countless bean-sized beads of sweat continuously dripped down from LV Itao's forehead like pearls, wetting his entire face. Let's see if I can cross the 9,501st step. If I can't, then I can only recuperate on the 9,500 step for a period of time. The 9,500 step happened to be a multiple of 500, so the pressure here was much weaker than the surroundings. The best way for LV Tao to recuperate on this step was to recuperate. After all, he had been recuperating on this step for a while. LV Tao's eyes flickered. He suddenly lifted his foot and fiercely stepped towards the 9,501st step. Suddenly, countless pressure like a deep-sea whirlpool continuously impacted LV Tao's body. Puchi! With a muffled groan, LV Tao could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. His body trembled. In the end, he did not step on the 9,501st step. Instead, he shook his head and returned to the 9,500 step. He silently sat down cross-legged. The last 500 steps. As long as I cross the last 500 steps, I will be able to reach the top of the mountain and enjoy the scenery that Lu Hantian has never experienced before. I must first adjust my condition. Although LV Tao was eager to reach the top of the mountain, he also knew that he had reached his limit. If he did not properly recuperate, he was afraid that he would not be able to walk past the 100th step before exhausting all his energy. The last 500 steps. Wait for me. LV Tao silently muttered. He closed his eyes again and began to recover his strength. When LV Tao finally stopped at the 9,500 step, everyone on the platform had a trace of disappointment. They originally thought that LV Tao would reach the top of the mountain today. It seemed that this kind of thinking was unrealistic. Now we can only wait. It is said that the pressure of the last 1,000 steps of Zhongling Mountain is the most terrifying. If you are not strong enough, the powerful pressure there is enough to crush you into meat paste. Even for a genius like LV Tao, under such pressure, I'm afraid it would be extremely difficult. It seems that we can only wait for LV Tao to move next time. Next time, LV Tao should be able to reach the top of the mountain. Many people on the platform were filled with confidence in LV Tao, because LV Tao's performance along the way was simply too stunning, even more stunning than Lu Hantian back then. Back then, Lu Hantian was only one step away from reaching the peak of Zhongling Mountain. As for LV Tao, who was even more stunning than Lu Hantian, in everyone's eyes, he undoubtedly had the strength to reach the peak. At this moment, Lu Nantian couldn't help but reveal a smile on his face. Even he was surprised that LV Tao was able to reach such a height. It seems that Tao is hiding a lot of secrets. He was actually able to climb to the 9,500 step. It seems that breaking Big Brother Hantian's record is just around the corner. Thinking that LV Tao might be able to break the record that had not been broken in Zhongling Mountain for thousands of years, Lu Nanshan's eyes revealed a blazing light. Congratulations, Brother LV. If LV Tao is able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain, I'm afraid that there will really be great fortune. That's right. Not only will he break the record of the Essence Chi Tower battle, I'm afraid that he will also be able to obtain a lot of benefits. The other four giants also congratulated Lu Nantian one after another, their eyes filled with undisguised envy. They naturally yearned for a genius like LV Tao, but unfortunately, LV Tao was a genius from the house of Marquis Qin. Even if they wanted to rope him in, it was impossible. Hearing the praises of the other four, Lu Nantian waved his hand, but his face was brimming with a complacent smile. LV Tao was so hardworking as his father, he was naturally very happy. I wonder how that Zhuoan is doing? I haven't paid any attention to him these past few days. After regaining his senses, Lu Nantian suddenly thought of Jun, who was ranked second. In the past few days, because of LV Tao's matter, everyone seemed to have forgotten about Jun. As he said that, Lu Nanshan's gaze shifted to the second floor of the Golden Tower. Immediately after, he was surprised to discover that the light on the second floor was still dazzling. It was obvious that Zhuan had yet to leave Zhongling Mountain. Chapter 518. Oiling his. Lu Nantian took a deep breath. Not only did the light spot in second place not disappear, but it was also emitting a blazing light. What surprised Lu Nantian even more was that the light spot representing Zhuoan had already reached the 8,000 step. Lu Nanshan's strange behavior was quickly noticed by the other 4 magnates. Following Lu Nanshan's line of sight, the other 4 magnates also focused their attention on the light spot in second place. Then, the same sound of inhaling could be heard. Second place, Zhuowen, 8,000 step. 8,000 step? When did this Zhuowen reach the 8,000 step? After a moment of silence, Su Chang finally could not help but cry out in surprise. A period of time ago, due to LV Itao's valiant performance, Zhuowen was basically forgotten by everyone because they all knew that Zhongling Mountain's ranking was already very obvious. The first place was undoubtedly Lu Yitao. Although Zhuowen was in second place, the gap between him and Lu Yitao was too big. Therefore, when Zhuowen surpassed Luo Xing, everyone's attention was no longer on Zhuowen. As the most promising person to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain, Lu Yitao naturally attracted the attention of countless people. But now, no one expected that Zhuowen, who no one paid attention to before, would actually reach the 8,000 step unknowingly. He was only 1,500 steps away from Lu Yitao. The commotion caused by LV Nantian and the others finally attracted the attention of the other people on the platform. Thus, everyone shifted their gaze from LV Yitao to the light spot of the second place. Then, the platform suddenly became completely silent. 8,000 steps? How did this Zhuowen suddenly reach the 8,000 step? Wasn't he only at the 3,000 step? It's only been 5 or 6 days. Oh my god! Is this Zhuowen a freak? Even Luo Xing from Jade Lady Star Court only reached the 2,000 step. This kid actually reached the 8,000 step? Is my eyesight failing me? After a short moment of silence, an earth-shattering uproar and clamor ensued. Everyone was in an uproar as they stared at the golden tower. Disbelief filled everyone's faces as if it was a beautiful scenery. Unlike the platform that was already in an uproar, Zhongling Mountain was extremely calm and serene at this time. On the 8,000th step, Zhuowen's body was overflowing with golden light. He took out his identity token and looked at the light spot in the first place. His golden eyes were full of confidence. 9,500 step? Unfortunately, the last 500 steps of Zhongling Mountain are not so easy to pass. I wonder if LV Yitao will be able to pass them. After muttering to himself for a while, Zhuowen slowly got up. His entire body moved without any wind, and rumbling sounds continuously resounded from Zhuowen's body. At this moment, Zhuowen was able to display the great power of his physical body with every movement he made. At this time, the number of acupoints in his body had exceeded 300, and most of the veins in his body had turned into a dazzling golden color. Moreover, Zhuowen found that the combination of his mental strength and veins had not only improved his physical strength, but also his control of his body had reached an extremely terrifying level. For example, before, Zhuowen could only mobilize the power of his limbs and bones. Now, however, he could perfectly control every trace of blood and winding meridians in his muscles. He did not waste a single bit of power in the battle and could exert every bit of power to the extreme. Maybe this is the principle of using 4 tails to overcome 1,000 caddies. This kind of perfect control over the body allows me to bring out the limits of the limited power in my body. As he gently clenched his fist, the ear-piercing sound of bones cracking continuously rang out. However, Zhuowen's face revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. This perfect control of power made Zhuowen feel extremely comfortable. The discovery of spiritual qi and the strength of the great nirvana sun in his body allowed Zhuowen to be like a fish in water in the oppressive Zhongling Mountain. Zhuowen knew that he was still far from reaching his limit. Let's go! The great nirvana sun will soon reach the beginner level. Out of the 365 acupoints in his body, there are only 65 acupoints that have not been broken through. As long as you break through the remaining 65 acupoints, I'm afraid that even an ordinary ultimate 4-wheel emperor will not be your match. Xiao Hei's voice slowly rang out in his mind. Its voice was filled with gratification. Even it was a little surprised that Zhuowen could reach the 8,000 step. Now, it was indeed looking forward to the possibility of Zhuowen reaching the peak. Tap tap tap. The crisp sound of footsteps rang out once again. Zhuowen nodded and continued to climb towards the peak with steady steps. His speed was neither fast nor slow, but it seemed steady and steady. He moved. Zhuowen actually moved again. I really didn't expect that this kid could still continue climbing after the 8,000 step. Looks like we've underestimated this kid. Perhaps he has the qualifications to challenge LV Tao. You're wrong. Zhuowen being able to reach the 8,000 step is indeed extremely inconceivable. However, compared to LV Tao, there's still a huge gap. Don't you know that the pressure of the last 1,000 steps of Zhongling Mountain is the most terrifying? Furthermore, when LV Tao was at the 8,000 step, his speed was much faster than Zhuowen's. When Zhuowen moved, everyone on the platform also let out a monstrous uproar. No one had expected that Zhuowen actually still had the strength to climb above the 8,000 step. This was really unbelievable. Many people even thought that Zhuowen already had the qualifications to challenge LV Tao. However, even more people showed disdain. They didn't think that Zhuowen was a match for LV Tao. Although many people outside praised and criticized Zhuowen, who was in Zhongling Mountain, naturally didn't know. Even if he knew, he probably wouldn't care too much. At this moment, he was thinking of ways to successfully cultivate the beginner level of Great Nirvana. Sunday time passed day by day. In the blink of an eye, another 5 days had passed. During these 5 days, LV Tao still sat on the 9,900 step without moving. Obviously, he was still silently cultivating the state of his body. After all, the pressure above the 9,000 step had already reached an extremely terrifying level. Although LV Tao was on the 9,500 step and the pressure was much weaker than the surrounding environment, this was only relative. The pressure of the 9,500 step was much higher than that of the 9,000 step. Under the influence of such an extreme pressure, it wasn't easy to concentrate and adjust one's state. If an ordinary warrior was on the 9,500 step, not only would he be unable to concentrate on healing, he might even be directly crushed into meat paste by the powerful pressure. Even someone as strong as LV Tao would need a lot of time to suppress the influence of the surrounding pressure in order to have the energy to completely adjust one's state. Therefore, if LV Tao wanted to adjust his body's state to its peak, he would need a lot of time. During these 5 days, for the many masters of the various forces on the platform and the many genius warriors on the square, it wasn't so peaceful. This was because Zhuowen, who was originally ignored by everyone, actually climbed from the 8,000 step to the 9,000 step in these 5 days. He was only 500 steps away from LV Tao. Especially when everyone saw Zhuowen's name constantly approaching LV Tao's, everyone's heart was about to jump out. It felt as if someone else was stepping on the door of their heart. 9,000 step? How did Zhuowen do it? 9,000 step. In the previous Vitality Tower battles, the number of geniuses who could reach such a high height can be counted on 2 hands. This time, 2 people actually appeared. Forget about LV Tao. How did Zhuowen also reach such a height? This Zhuowen might be the biggest dark horse in this year's Essence Chi Pagoda battle. In this Zhongling Mountain, not only did he surpass the 4 super geniuses, Luo Xing, Zhu Qi, Su Tianliang and Qin Badian, he now has the qualifications to challenge the number 1 genius of Muqin County, LV Tao. I really don't know if LV Tao found out that Zhuowen is catching up. If he found out, I wonder what kind of mood LV Tao would have? The moment Zhuowen reached the 9,000 step, the platform became as noisy as a tsunami. Everyone was discussing spiritedly, and the focus was on this young man who came from a low-level city. On the 9,000th step, Zhuowen was sweating like rain. His body was covered in bloody mist, and he looked quite miserable. The pressure here had reached an extremely terrifying level. Even if Zhuowen's body was strong, he still felt that he could not bear it. That LV Tao's strength is really strong. He can forcibly reach the 9,500 step by relying on his own strength. Slowly taking a breath, Zhuowen silently sat cross-legged. He knew that if it were not for the spirit chi of Zhongling Mountain, he would not have been able to hold on until now. Today, I will use the spirit chi below the 9,000 step to break through the remaining 45 acupoints. His eyes flickered, and Zhuowen's right hand formed a claw. He suddenly grabbed the step under his feet, and a palm-sized hole was instantly smashed. Kid, the amount of spirit chi needed to break through the remaining 45 acupoints is too large. At that time, I'm afraid that it will attract the attention of the weapon spirit again. At that time, you won't be as lucky as the first time. The weapon spirit of Zhongling Mountain will definitely not let you go a second time, Xiao He suddenly said seriously. I must break through all of them. If I can't reach the entry level of Great Nirvana Sun, I'm afraid that I won't be able to reach the 9,500 step. I'm very clear about my own situation. Zhuowen's eyes revealed a trace of ruthlessness. The pressure after the 9,000 step had already exceeded Zhuowen's expectations. He knew that if he did not break through the remaining acupoints in his body and reach the entry level of Great Nirvana Sun, he was afraid that he would really be eliminated. This time I must fight. So what if I'm discovered by the weapon spirit? At most, I'll leave Zhongling Mountain before the weapon spirit catches up. Chapter 5:19. Breaking through all apertures, the last 45 apertures must all be broken through at this moment. All of them must be broken through. Countless blue mist-like spiritual chi were like monstrous waves, covering the sky and covering the earth as they violently gushed out from the steps that had already turned into fine powder. Zhuan silently sat cross-legged on the steps. Boom boom boom. Countless explosive sounds continuously rang out from Zhuowen's countless apertures, bones, and meridians. At this moment, the golden color seemed to have penetrated deep into his bones. Zhuan was filled with a dazzling golden light from the outside to the inside. Zhuan, this fellow is really too crazy. If he absorbs spiritual chi in such an unbridled manner, he will definitely be able to break through all the remaining apertures in his body. However, the artifact spirit in Zhongling Mountain will also completely notice you. When that time comes, how will you deal with it? In the middle of his sea of consciousness, Xiao He looked at the youth sitting cross-legged with a complicated expression. Originally, it had rejected Zhuowen's risky decision. However, the determination on Zhuowen's face let it know that no matter what it said, Zhuowen would not change his mind. Then I'll accompany you in your madness. When Xiao He looked at the focused and serious expression on Zhuowen's face, it suddenly smiled. The path of an expert was originally filled with death. On this path that was filled with corpses and bones, if one did not gamble with their life, they would eventually become mediocre and mediocre for the rest of their lives. A general success was built on thousands of bones. If one did not want to become a pile of bones by the roadside on the path of an expert, then one had to gamble with one's life. On this path that was filled with countless dangers and fear, one could not retreat, nor could one be afraid. One only needed to move forward, continuously moving forward. Zhuan waved his right hand. Instantly, the spiritual chi gushed out from the steps like a tide and drilled into Zhuowen's body. A huge amount of spiritual chi endlessly drilled into Zhuowen's Naiwen Palace, causing the mental energy in his Naiwen Palace to increase by several times. Bang bang bang. The muffled sounds of the acupoints being broken continuously came out from Zhuowen's body. The strange sounds almost formed a rhythmic symphony. The 321st acupoint, break. With a low shout, the golden light on Zhuowen's body spread out in all directions. Immediately, crackling sounds rang out from his bones, and Zhuowen's aura became even more powerful. The 322nd, 323rd, 330th, 335th, 340th, 345th, 350th. When the 350th acupoint was opened, the golden light on Zhuowen's body was so dense that it was almost tangible. It was extremely dazzling, like a human-shaped sun. Roar, roar, roar. At the same time, the originally calm Zhongling Mountain began to tremble violently like a ferocious beast at this moment. Numerous terrifying and mournful beast roars roared out from within the entire Zhongling Mountain. Kid, be careful. The weapon spirit of Zhongling Mountain has finally noticed you again. Xiao He's solemn voice slowly sounded in Zhuowen's sea of consciousness. Hearing this, Zhuowen's expression changed slightly. He clenched his teeth and stroked his right hand again, absorbing the spiritual chi at the bottom of the steps even more desperately. 15 more acupoints and his great nirvana sun would truly reach the entry level. 351. 353. 355. 357. 360. Roar, roar, roar. This time, the beast roars from Zhongling Mountain were even more violent. The entire Zhongling Mountain shook violently, as if the sky was falling and the earth was splitting. At the bottom of the steps, a powerful force that Zhuan was familiar with suddenly rushed out, wanting to pull back all the spiritual chi that had leaked out. There are still 5 acupoints left. Don't think that you can take them back so easily. Seeing that this force wanted to take back the spiritual chi, Zhuan roared and slammed his right hand down. Countless golden veins crisscrossed on Zhuan's arm. The powerful force turned into a large golden hand in the void and suddenly bombarded the force at the bottom of the steps. Boom! The large golden hand collided violently with the force at the bottom of the steps. Endless waves of air swirled and a ring-shaped ripple spread out in all directions. Suddenly, the countless steps around were directly turned into dust under the powerful aftershock of the powerful force. Zhuan spat out a mouthful of blood and his face became extremely pale. His golden body faintly showed signs of collapsing. However, at this time, Zhuan had opened 360 acupoints in his body. The strength of his body had almost reached an unparalleled level. Although he was seriously injured, he had temporarily blocked the force at the bottom of the steps. There are still 5 acupoints left. I must completely break through them. Forcefully suppressing the injuries in his body, Zhuan pressed his right hand again. Another large golden hand descended from the sky and violently bombarded the bottom of the steps, completely sealing the exit of the force at the bottom. Then, Zhuan seized the time and absorbed all the spiritual chi that was still gushing out from the steps into his body, preparing to break through the remaining 5 acupoints. 361st acupoint, break. 362nd, 363rd, 364th acupoints, break, break, break. With a loud roar, Zhuan was like a madman. His body was surrounded by golden light. Under the bombardment of the force at the bottom of the steps, his body faintly showed signs of collapsing. However, Zhuan gritted his teeth and finally pulled through. This is the last acupoint. This time I must break it. His eyes flickered. Just as Zhuan was about to use the spiritual chi to break through the last acupoint, the 2 golden palms at the bottom of the steps burst open at this moment. A sharp beastly roar rang out. The power of the weapon spirit had finally arrived in front of Zhuan. Boom! The power soared into the sky and finally turned into a large gray palm that was hundreds of feet wide. It crushed down on Zhuan. Boy, run! Don't worry about the last acupoint. You have plenty of time to break through the last acupoint in the future. Now, the weapon spirit of Zhongling Mountain is really angry. This power is not something you can contend against. Xiao Hei's voice rang out in his sea of consciousness. At this time, Xiao Hei could no longer remain calm and hurriedly advised Zhuan anxiously. No. I can feel that if I don't seize this opportunity, it may be very difficult to have such an opportunity in the future. This time, I must give it a good shot. At this moment, Zhuan's eyes were scarlet red and his face was filled with madness. His feet suddenly stepped forward and Zhuan's right hand suddenly struck out. Instantly, countless golden rays burst out. Golden veins appeared on the surface of Zhuan's body in a crisscrossing manner. They constantly pulsed up and down as if they had a life of their own. Zhuan's aura also rose to the peak. I only need 5 breaths of time. As long as I can hold on for 5 breaths of time, I can finally break through the last acupoint. His eyes were filled with madness. Zhuan clasped his hands together and suddenly pushed them forward. Instantly, the dense golden veins burst out and quickly intertwined in front of Zhuan. In the end, they turned into a large golden net. Boom! Above the void, an enormous gray palm that was hundreds of meters long finally formed. Then, like a meteor, it rumbled and fell. In the blink of an eye, the gray palm finally smashed onto the large golden net. Blazing light continuously spread out like a balloon. For a moment, the entire Zhongling mountain trembled even more violently at this moment. It was as if the entire mountain was about to collapse. 5 breaths of time, I only need 5 breaths of time. Below the large golden net, Zhuan shouted in a low voice. At the same time, he stroked his right hand and absorbed the little remaining spiritual energy at the bottom of the steps into his body. Then, he skillfully guided the mental energy in his body to rush along the meridians in his body to the last acupoint. Break through. You must break through. With a low roar, Zhuowen's eyes were filled with hope. He knew that as long as he broke through the last acupoint, he might be able to break free from the power of the artifact spirit. Boom, boom, boom. The gray palm continuously smashed onto the large golden net. In just 3 breaths of time, the large golden net had actually become extremely dim, almost without any light. In the 4th breath of time, a cracking sound was heard. The large golden net directly shattered into nothingness, and the gray palm followed closely behind. Just a little more. Looking at the gray palm that was getting closer and closer, Zhuowen's heart was filled with a strong sense of danger. With a loud roar, he tried even harder to break through the last acupoint. When the gray palm arrived within an inch of Zhuowen's forehead, the last acupoint finally broke through. Suddenly, an extremely dazzling golden light burst out from Zhuowen's body. The blazing golden light fiercely broke through the gray palm and soared into the sky. Above the void, it continuously condensed and reformed, turning into a huge human-shaped shadow that was thousands of meters tall. The shadow had 4 heads and 8 arms, glaring angrily, and endless golden flames under its feet. Immovable Wisdom King. Raising his head, Zhuan looked at the golden giant in the void, and the corner of Zhuowen's mouth could not help but mutter to himself. The immovable Wisdom King looked down at Zhuan, who was like an ant, and his solemn voice echoed throughout the entire Zhongling mountain. It's the great divine incantation, the great bright incantation, the supreme incantation, the supreme incantation, the unparalleled incantation, capable of eliminating all sufferings. Hence the Prajna Parmitha mantra. That is, the mantra is, reveal the truth, Parmitha reveal the truth, Parmitha reveal the truth, Parmitha monk reveal the truth, Bodhi sa poha. The obscure Sanskrit chants slowly reverberated. Then, Akala's huge foot stomped down, turning into countless golden torrents that surged into Zhuowen's body. Instantly, Zhuan felt that his body was filled with endless power. This power made Zhuowen feel so comfortable that he could not help but roar at the sky. Zhuowen knew that the moment the Akalanatha phantom entered his body, his great son Nirvana had finally crossed the threshold. Roar, roar, roar. At this moment, Zhongling Mountain's artifact spirit finally went completely crazy. Zhuowen's resistance was considered a provocation by it. An even more powerful force suddenly gushed out from the depths of the steppes, enveloping Zhuan. Go. Chapter 520. Competition. The instant Zhuowen moved, all the leaders on the platform focused their gazes on Zhuowen's dot of light. Everyone knew that if Zhuowen advanced another 50 steps, he would be on par with Lv. After all, Lv was still on the 9,500 step. Zhuowen moved again. I never thought that he would still be able to climb up after reaching the 9,000 step. This is truly inconceivable. Lu Nanshan's expression finally changed. Zhuowen's current performance had truly shocked him. It must be known that the pressure after the 9,000 step was truly terrifying. Even Lv was somewhat unable to withstand the pressure. Look, how is this Zhuowen's speed so fast? He passed 5 or 6 steps in the blink of an eye. What's going on? Suddenly, there was a burst of noise on the platform, and a surprised voice reverberated throughout the platform. What? After the 9,000 step, this Zhuowen still has this kind of speed? He passed 5 or 6 steps in the blink of an eye. Hearing those words, Lu Nanshan's pupils shrank. His gaze immediately focused on Zhuowen's dot of light. When he saw that the golden dot of light on the golden tower was indeed rapidly ascending, Lu Nanshan's pupils shrank again and again. It's actually so fast. Just how did this Zhuowen do it? Lu Nanshan's entire body trembled. His eyes bulged out of their sockets as he couldn't help but tremble as he spoke. If Zhuan had reached this kind of speed when he was 2,000 or 3,000 steps, Lu Nantian wouldn't be surprised. However, this Zhuan had actually reached this kind of speed after the 9,000 step. Lu Nantian couldn't help but be shocked. After the 9,000 step, the pressure in the Zhongling mountain would reach a qualitative change. The pressure was so great that it was as if countless mountains were pressing down on one's spine. It was simply difficult to move forward. Even the extremely powerful LV Tao's speed would be extremely slow after the 9,000 step. After the 9,000 step, this Zhuan was actually able to reach a terrifying speed of 5 or 6 steps in an instant. Lu Nantian's first reaction was that this was impossible. However, this kind of impossible reality had truly appeared in front of his eyes. All the leaders on the platform had the same expression as Lu Nantian. It was even more exaggerated than Lu Nantian's. They naturally knew how terrifying the pressure after the 9,000 step of the Zhongling mountain was. They simply couldn't understand how Zhuan was still able to reach this speed. Zhuan has already reached 9,200 steps. He's only 300 steps away from LV Tao. Could it be that LV Tao hasn't noticed? It's still at the 9,500 step. I'm afraid that LV Tao was careless. The 9,500 step is already extremely close to the peak of the Zhongling mountain. With LV Tao's arrogance, I'm afraid that from the beginning to the end, he didn't put Zhuan in his eyes. That's why he didn't even look at the identity token. If LV Tao still doesn't look at it, I'm afraid that the first place will really be taken away by this Zhuan. Everyone on the platform stared at the constantly rising light spot on the golden tower. They could feel that the hearts in their chests were constantly beating up and down along with the rising light spot. Everyone's heart was in their throats at this moment. They knew that the first place was now full of suspense. Whether it was Zhuan or LV Tao, both of them had the qualifications to compete for the first place. Even LV Nantian felt uneasy at this moment. LV Tao was the #1 genius of the house of Marquis Qin. He naturally hoped that the first place would be taken by LV Tao. However, Zhuan's current performance was too strong. After reaching the 9,000 step, his speed could still reach such a terrifying level. It was really difficult for LV Tao to take the first place. Just as all the masters of the forces on the platform at the top of the mountain were looking forward to the first place, in the huge square outside the Zhongling mountain on the 3rd floor of the Vitality Tower, many genius warriors who had withdrawn from the Zhongling mountain were looking at the huge Zhongling mountain in front of them in shock. The beastly roars that were like monstrous waves resounded throughout the entire Zhongling mountain at this moment. It was as if all the beasts that had been slumbering in the Zhongling mountain had awakened. The entire Zhongling mountain was trembling. The strong vibrations almost affected the standing square. Even some of the weaker warriors couldn't stand stably under the vibrations and were in a sorry state. What's wrong with the Zhongling mountain? What the hell is going on? Puzzled expressions spread across the faces of all the geniuses. The sudden tremors of the Zhongling mountain made them feel puzzled and confused. Su Tianliang frowned. This wasn't the first time that the Zhongling mountain had trembled. Before they had withdrawn from the Zhongling mountain, the Zhongling mountain had already trembled once. At that time, they didn't care. But now, the Zhongling mountain was trembling again. Moreover, the intensity of the tremors was much stronger than the previous time. Su Tianliang already suspected that the abnormality of the Zhongling mountain was related to someone in the Zhongling mountain. This has never happened to the Zhongling mountain in the past, but it has happened twice this time. I'm afraid that this abnormality is related to someone. Luo Xing, who had been silent, suddenly said. When Su Tianliang, Zhu Qi, and Qin Batian heard this, they all nodded in agreement. After all, they were the super geniuses of the 5 super forces. They knew much more about the Zhongling mountain, which stood on the 3rd floor of the Yuanqi Tower, than the average person. If there was no external influence, it was impossible for any abnormalities to happen in Zhongling mountain. However, it happened now, and it happened twice in a row. This abnormality could only be man-made, and it should be related to someone in Zhongling mountain. Only Zhuan and LV Tao are left in the Zhongling mountain. If the abnormality of the Zhongling Mountain is related to someone, then would it be Zhuowen or LV Tao? Qin Batian scratched his head and said in a rough voice, "Brother Qin, you think too highly of Zhuowen, don't you think? If it's related to someone, then it can only be Brother LV Tao. After all, Brother LV is the #1 genius of the house of Marquis Qin. He is also the person who has the hope of reaching the peak of the Zhongling Mountain. Do you think that bastard Zhuowen can be compared to Brother LV?" Su Tianliang suddenly sneered. The abnormality of the Zhongling Mountain had indeed surprised him, but he was very clear about Zhuowen's strength. How could he cause such a commotion in the Zhongling Mountain? Hearing this, Qin Batian and Zhu Qi both nodded. Although Zhuowen's results in the Zhongling Mountain were not bad, the gap between him and LV Tao was too big. The only one who could cause such a commotion in the Zhongling Mountain was LV Tao. However, Luo Xing frowned. She faintly felt that the abnormality in the Zhongling Mountain had something to do with Zhuowen. This was because when the Zhongling Mountain first shook, all the warriors in the Zhongling Mountain stopped in their tracks. Even LV Tao was no exception. However, there was one person who did not stop. Instead, he quickly climbed up the mountain. That person was Zhuowen. At that time, Luo Xing faintly felt that the shaking of the Zhongling Mountain might have something to do with Zhuowen. However, this idea was unrealistic, so she did not take it to heart. However, now that the Zhongling Mountain was shaking even more violently, Luo Xing began to suspect that the shaking of the Zhongling Mountain was related to Zhuowen and not LV Tao. "I feel that the abnormality in the Zhongling Mountain should be caused by Zhuowen," Luo Xing suddenly said coldly as she gently stroked the hair in front of her forehead. When Luo Xing's words came out, Qin Batian, Su Tianliang, and Zhu Qi suddenly became silent. Soon after, their gazes converged on Luo Xing. The expressions of the three people became extremely strange. It seems that the #1 genius of our Jade Lady Star Court, the #1 beauty of the province, Luo Xing, seems to be interested in Zhuowen. The matter is already so obvious, yet you are still siding with Zhuowen? Su Tianliang suddenly said in a strange tone. Zhu Qi coldly stared at Luo Xing. Originally, he did not have a good impression of Luo Xing. At this time, he naturally would not give the latter a good face. However, Qin Batian simply smiled and said, "Sister Luo Xing, although that Yun is not bad, the gap between him and LV Tao is too huge. How could he have the ability to cause the Zhongling Mountain to shake so violently?" "That's right. Brother LV has already reached the 9,500th step. As for that Yun, he has long been left behind by Brother LV. How could this child have such an ability? If you don't believe me, you can take a look at Zhuowen's current position." The corners of Su Tianliang's mouth were filled with a cold smile. He took out the identity token from his bosom, intending to find out Zhuowen's current position to refute Luo Xing's point of view. However, when Su Tianliang's gaze converged on the second light spot on the identity token, his pupils instantly shrank to the size of needles. His entire person seemed to be frozen in place. "Brother Su, what's wrong with you? Didn't you see the identity token? Then where is Zhuowen? I'm afraid that he has been left behind by Brother LV?" Zhu Qi and Qin Batian also discovered Su Tianliang's strange state. They hurriedly came to Su Tianliang's side and their gazes landed on the second light spot. Immediately, their bodies trembled and they actually froze in place. Their eyes seemed to protrude from their sockets as they stared straight at the identity token in Su Tianliang's hand. The trio's faces were filled with a rich mix of disbelief, shock, and disbelief. It could be said that it was extremely rich and colorful. Luo Xing also discovered the trio's strange state. Her long, shapely eyebrows slightly furrowed as she curiously took out her own identity token. However, when her gaze converged on the light spot on the identity token, her delicate body involuntarily trembled as her pretty face was filled with disbelief. This was because the first and second light spots on the identity token were actually extremely close to each other. Evidently, the difference between the first and second place was not that great. At the same time, a hubbub of noise rose from the entire square at this moment. Everyone had already noticed the two light spots that were extremely close to each other on the identity token. In an instant, The noise soared to the sky and reverberated around the entire square. The reason for all of this was because of the two remaining lines of information on the identity token. First place, LVE Tau, 9,500 step. Chapter 521. LVE Tau's nervousness and uproar like a monstrous wave boiled up in the empty square. Every genius martial artist in the square stared blankly at the information displayed on the identity token in their hands. 9,300 steps? When did Juan reach the 9,300 steps? Isn't this too fast? That Juan's speed is very fast. He's actually closing in on LVE Tau at the 9,500 steps. Didn't LVE Tau notice that Juan is closing in on him? If he doesn't notice it, I'm afraid he'll really catch up. Everyone's gaze was focused on the light spot on the identity token, especially the light spot that was closing in on LVE Tau. Everyone was sweating for LVE Tau. Clang. Su Tianliang's right hand shook, and the identity token in his palm suddenly fell to the ground. His gloomy face was full of disbelief. He never thought that Zhuowen would also reach above 9,000 steps, and was constantly shortening the distance between him and LVE Tau, who was in first place. This, Zhu Qi and Qin Batin also opened their mouths slightly. They didn't know what to say. They just stood there in a daze. Where did Zhuowen come from? How can a genius from a low-level city achieve such an unbelievable level? Luo Xing's beautiful eyes were filled with complexity. She increasingly found that the slightly thin youth gave her a mysterious and unfathomable feeling. Every time this child did something, it would always make her inexplicably shocked and even shocked the world. Boom, boom, boom. The huge Zhongling mountain was like an enraged primordial beast at this moment. It violently rolled and shook, like a lone boat in the sea that could capsize at any time. On the 9,500 steps, LVE Tau, who was sitting cross-legged, had a pair of sword-like eyebrows tightly knitted. He stared at Zhongling Mountain in front of him with a solemn expression. Zhongling Mountain is starting to shake again. What's going on? What's going on at Zhongling Mountain? LVE Tau remembered very clearly that on the third day he entered Zhongling Mountain, there had been a similar tremor. However, the tremor this time was even more intense than the last time. It was as if the entire mountain was about to collapse. Zhongling Mountain wouldn't shake for no reason. Could it be related to that Zhuowen? That Zhuowen's potential is indeed not bad, but it shouldn't be enough to cause such an abnormality in Zhonglingshan. Feeling the violent shaking of Zhongling Mountain, LVE Tau suddenly felt uneasy. This feeling made him feel suffocated, as if something had been taken away from him. After hesitating for a moment, LVE Tau slowly took out his identity token. In fact, after entering the 9,000 step, he no longer intended to pay attention to Zhuowen. Although Zhuowen had reached the 5,000 step for the first time last time, there was still a huge gap between them. He didn't believe that Zhuowen would be able to reach the 9,000 step in a short 7 or 8 days. He even thought that Zhuowen might not even be able to reach the 6,000 step. However, Zhongling Mountain shook even more violently, causing LVE Tau to have no choice but to look at Zhuowen, who had yet to leave Zhongling Mountain. Although the abnormality of Zhongling Mountain should have nothing to do with Zhuowen, he still wanted to confirm it. When LVE Tau's gaze finally focused on the identity token, his pupils constricted into needles. He couldn't help but take a deep breath and stand up with a swoosh. This was because the identity token showed that Zhuowen, who was in second place, had already reached the 9,300 step. He was only 200 steps away from him. Turning his head, LVE Tau's gaze pierced through the layers of clouds and shot towards the back of the steps. He seemed to be able to faintly sense that a figure was approaching him at a terrifying speed. LVE Tau's expression was unprecedentedly solemn. He had his pride, because in his opinion, no one would be his opponent in this Origin Chi Tower battle. If he wanted to compete, he would compete with himself, with the Lu Hantian of the past. However, all of this pride, at this moment, when he saw the light that represented Zhuowen on the identity token, all of it vanished. LVE Tao's proud heart was also shaken at this moment. He couldn't help but be shaken. He couldn't help but be shocked. He stared at the identity token in his hand. Ever since he became sensible, he had never cared so much about a person. Moreover, it was a lowly cultivator from a low-level city. At this moment, LV Tao suddenly recalled the youth's figure that had slowly walked out of the golden door that had descended from the sky in the Mountain of Trials. He had surpassed Qin Batian, Su Tanliang, Zhu Qi, Luo Xing, and everyone except LV Tao. Now, he was only 200 steps away from him. Such a distance made LV Tao, who had always had an indifferent expression, feel an unprecedented nervousness and throbbing in his heart. I really didn't expect that you would be able to reach above the 9,000 step. I underestimated you before. You already have the qualifications to be my opponent. However, it may not be so easy to surpass me. Now, let's let everyone see who is the true number one. At this moment, LV Tao's expression became unprecedentedly serious and passionate. He had stood at the peak of the younger generation for far too long. The loneliness of standing at the top was something he had experienced countless times. Now that a freak like Zhuan had appeared, the surging battle intent hidden in the depths of LV Tao's heart had finally been aroused. Boom! LV Tao finally moved. His foot suddenly stomped on the 9,501st step. Instantly, a terrifying pressure formed into an endless spiral storm, densely crushing LV Tao's body. LV Tao's entire body seemed to have frozen. Break for me. With a low roar, LV Tao's foot stomped on the 9,501st step, and he continued to climb up step by step. His face was filled with determination and pride. Let's have a proper competition now. Step by step, he walked towards the peak of the mountain. Although LV Tao's expression was extremely calm, his heart was not as calm. In fact, he was still far from adjusting his body to its peak condition. He had originally planned to rest for 2 more days before heading towards the peak. However, Zhuowen's powerful arrival had destroyed this plan in his heart. At this moment, Zhuowen's entire body was flickering with golden light. Golden veins were like small snakes that covered his entire body. He had already reached the 950th step. A deafening roar whistled from behind Zhuan. The invisible sound wave seemed to have a strange magic power as it spread to every corner of Zhongling Mountain. Looks like the artifact spirit of Zhongling Mountain is determined to bite me and not let me go, right? Feeling the powerful aura chasing closely behind him, and the beast roar that seemed to be close at hand, Zhuowen's eyes revealed a trace of worry. The pressure after the 9,000 step was extremely terrifying. At this moment, Nguyen had already cultivated the great Nirvana Sun to the entry level. All the acupuncture points in his body had been opened, and his physical strength was extremely powerful. However, under this pressure, he still felt some obstruction. This artifact spirit seems to be affected after the 9,000 step. Although its speed is faster than you, it's not much faster, so you should hurry up and leave. Xiao Hei's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. Hearing these words, Yuan gently sighed. He had thought that the artifact spirit's power behind him would be as fast as last time. Then, it would be a matter of time before he was caught up. Thinking back to when he was chased by the artifact spirit until he was in a sorry state and was now able to deal with it with ease, Zhuan knew that everything was just an illusion. It was not that the artifact spirit's power had weakened, but that he had become much stronger than before. Let's go. That LV Tao has also moved. I'm afraid that he already knows that I've caught up. Looking at the identity token in his hand, he saw that the light spot that represented LV Tao had finally moved. Zhuowen's eyes revealed a trace of fighting spirit. He did not know if he, who had opened 365 acupuncture points, would be able to defeat the number 1 expert of the younger generation in Muqin County, LV Tao? LV Tao. Then let me see how strong you, the number 1 expert of the younger generation in Muqin County, are. As for the number 1 position, will you be able to keep it? Muttering to himself, Zhuowen's heart was filled with pride. His feet suddenly stomped and immediately, he quickly climbed towards the top of the mountain. He moved. LV Tao finally moved. He must have seen the identity token. He must have also seen Zhuowen, who is closing in on him step by step. It seems that Lve Tao has already felt threatened by Jun. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to change his own pattern and climb the remaining 500 steps. That Juan is indeed abnormal. To be able to catch up with Lve Tao, this child's talent is indeed terrifying. At this moment, all the warriors in the square realized that Lve Tao's light spot, which had not moved for 5 days, had finally moved. They all knew that Lve Tao had most likely discovered that Juan was catching up from behind. That Juan's speed has also increased. I really did not expect that this Juan could still increase his speed. What is his limit? Motherfucker, how can this Juan's speed still increase? How deep is his potential? And the moment Lve Tao's light spot moved, Juan's light spot, which was in second place, actually sped up once again. Its speed was 20 to 30% faster than before. This speed had already stunned everyone's jaws. This is the final battle. The first place will be decided between Juan and Lve Tao. I really don't know who will take first place in the end. At this moment, everyone in the square was nervous. If someone had asked them who would take first place in the past, they would definitely have answered Lve Tao without hesitation. However, the result of the first place was now full of suspense. This was because the biggest dark horse of this year's Essence Tower battle had appeared in the Zhongling Mountain test. This person's name was Yun. Above the mountain, clouds lingered. On the thick steps, Yun stood tall, his eyes filled with a rich light. Lve Tao, I, Zhuowen, will take first place. Chapter 522. Crazy Demon 9, 350 steps. 9,400 steps. 9,450 steps. 9,500 steps. From the 9,350 steps to the 9,500 steps, Zhuowen's speed was extremely fast. In just half an incense stick's worth of time, he had already reached the 9,500 steps. Such speed once again shocked everyone in the square. They could not imagine how Zhuowen could still increase his speed when he had already reached such a high step. The instant Zhuowen stepped onto the 9,500 steps, the entire Zhongling Mountain trembled once again as if it had received an extremely heavy blow. At this moment, Lve Tao had only reached the 9,630th step. At this moment, Lve Tao's expression was rather miserable. An intense pressure covered the surface of his body, almost causing his body to collapse. Droplets of sweat poured down like rain without any regard for his life. At this moment, Lve Tao no longer had the indifferent and elegant expression from before. Between his brows was a dense exhaustion. He was panting, his hair was disheveled, the veins on his forehead were bulging, and the blood in his body was boiling uncontrollably. However, when his gaze gathered on the identity token, his eyes were filled with madness. This was because he discovered that Zhuowen, who was behind him, had unknowingly reached the 9,500 step. There was only a gap of 130 steps between him and himself. Lve Tao suddenly raised his head and roared towards the sky. He lifted his foot and took another step, but his speed was much slower. On the 9,500 step, Yun was also in a rather miserable state. The pressure after the 9,000 step was indeed terrifying. Almost every step could increase the pressure by several times. Even Zhuowen found it difficult to endure. Kid, just now, you desperately ran for your life and left the artifact spirit far behind. The artifact spirit strength is probably 300 steps away from yours. If you stop at the 9,500 step, you only have 20 breaths of time. Seeing Zhuowen suddenly stop, Xiao He in the Sea of Consciousness naturally knew what Zhuowen was planning. He probably still wanted to absorb the spiritual energy here. Therefore, she very tacitly explained, 20 breaths of time is enough. Muttering to himself, Zhuowen's right hand turned into a claw. Golden light flickered as he slammed it on the steps under his feet. With a rumbling sound, the steps were blasted into fine powder. Waves of dense blue mist-like spirit chi gushed out like a geyser. Jun didn't hesitate and directly absorbed all the spirit chi that leaked out from the bottom of the steps into his body. As the 360 acupoints in his body had already been opened, Yun did not direct all of the spiritual energy into his Naiwan palace. Instead, he divided the spiritual energy into two parts. One part was used to replenish the mental energy that he had expended in his Naiwan palace, while the other part was used to replenish the physical energy that he had expended. The dense Ling Qi flowed into his body like rivers flowing into the sea. Instantly, an indescribable feeling of comfort spread throughout Zhuowen's body, causing Zhuowen to involuntarily let out a loud roar. With the continuous replenishment of the spirit qi, Zhuowen's fatigue gradually faded away and was replaced by an abundance of energy. 10 breaths of time passed in the blink of an eye. At this moment, the weapon spirit behind him was only about 150 steps away from Zhuowen. With the replenishment of the spirit qi, Zhuowen's mental energy had also reached its peak. Perhaps the weapon spirit behind him had sensed that Zhuowen was once again unscrupulously absorbing spiritual qi, as furious roars continued to surge from behind him. The emotions within the roars seemed to want to tear Zhuowen into pieces. Kid, hurry up and leave. The weapon spirit is very angry now and is already increasing its speed. If you don't leave now, it will really catch up to you. Xiao Hei's face suddenly changed as she spoke. Hearing this, Zhun looked at the spirit qi that was still gushing out from under his feet with some pity. The spirit qi at the bottom of the steps was extremely abundant. However, with the weapon spirit chasing after him, Zhun really didn't dare to stay here any longer. What a pity for the remaining spirit qi. With a light sigh, Zhun stomped his feet and his speed increased by a large margin. With the replenishment of the spirit qi, Zhuowen's mental energy was almost undamaged and reached its peak state. Therefore, he could still barely maintain his speed. By the time Zhuowen set off, LV Tao had already reached the 9,700 step. At this moment, LV Tao's eyes were scarlet red, and his pupils were bloodshot. There was even a trace of blood flowing out from the corner of his mouth. 9,700 step. I really didn't expect the pressure here to have reached such a terrifying level. I wonder where Zhuowen is? Barely suppressing the boiling blood in his body, LV Tao once again placed his gaze on the identity token. This was the first time he cared so much about an opponent. The moment Zhuowen caught up, he knew that he had no choice but to pay attention to Zhuowen. This was the first time in history that he felt threatened by a young genius. Still at the 9,500 step? Looks like he can't hold on anymore. After all, the pressure here can't be compared to the other steps. When LV Tao discovered that the light spot representing Zhuowen in the identity token was still at the 9,500 step, a relaxed smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. This was the joy of defeating a strong opponent. However, the smile on LV Tao's face didn't last for long because he discovered that the light spot representing Zhuowen on the 9,500th step suddenly moved. Moreover, its speed was so fast that it was unbelievable. 9,510 steps. 9,520 steps. 9,530 steps. 9,540 steps. 9,550 steps. In 10 breaths of time, Zhuowen had consecutively crossed 50 steps, from the 9,500 step to the 9,550 step. Moreover, this speed was still slowly increasing, and the distance between them was shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. How is this possible? How could Zhuowen's speed be so fast? No, I can't let him surpass me. LV Tao roared loudly. His eyes were crimson red as he suddenly stomped on the 9,701st step. He couldn't let Zhuowen surpass him. He was the #1 genius of the younger generation in Muqing County, and his pride wouldn't allow him to fail. Boom, boom. Unfortunately, the pressure of the 9,700 step had already reached an extremely terrifying level. The instant LV Tao's foot stepped on it, the pressure formed a violent cyclone that suddenly acted on LV Tao's entire body. LV Tao's face flushed red, and a mouthful of cherry red blood immediately spurted out. LV Tao's body was on the verge of collapse, as if it would collapse at any moment. I refuse to accept this. First place is mine, LV Tao's, not yours. LV Tao's eyes were filled with dense madness as he roared towards the sky. He clapped his hands together and suddenly slammed them on his chest. Instantly, The white robe on his body shattered into powder under the powerful force, revealing his robust body. On LV Tao's chest, countless blood-red meridians gathered at the center of his chest, drawing a blood-red pattern in the center. It was a huge beast claw, a blood-red beast claw, and the smell of blood constantly spread out. This claw was a totem. It wasn't bright red in color, but a strange dark red. At this moment, LV Tao didn't hesitate to slam his palm on the totem on his chest. The blood horn immediately emitted a dense blood-red light, as if it had melted and merged with LV Tao's body. LV Tao's eyes became a strange dark red, and a terrifying aura burst out from his body. It was as if there was a primordial beast hidden in LV Tao's body that was gradually awakening. Boom, 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 boom. LV Tao seemed to have obtained new strength. He roared towards the sky and took a step forward, his speed almost reaching the limit. 9,750 steps. 9,800 steps. 9,850 steps. 9,900 steps. 9,950 steps. 9,950 steps. 9,950 steps. When LV Tao reached 9,950 steps, the blood claw totem on his chest gradually dimmed and finally became transparent. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to notice this blood claw. Obviously, this blood horn totem was another force that was forcibly sealed in LV Tao's body. It was probably LV Tao's trump card. However, LV Tao was fighting with his life on the line, so he forcefully undid the blood horn seal and obtained additional strength. Puchi, Juan, you can be proud that you forced me to use the blood essence that LV Hantian obtained from the blood demon's inheritance. This blood essence is my life-saving method. If it wasn't for the fact that my life was at stake, I would never use it. However, today I used it for you. Even if you lose to me, you will have no regrets. At this moment, his expression was extremely dim. Forcefully using the power of the blood horn totem caused the strength in his body to be severely insufficient. He knew that with his current condition, it was likely that he wouldn't be able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Slightly panting, LV Tao lowered his head to look at the identity token in his hand. This glance immediately caused LV Tao's eyes to widen, and his face was filled with disbelief. This is impossible. How can this be? He saw that the light spot that represented Zhuoan on the token had actually soared along with him. Moreover, its speed was slightly faster than before. 9,700 steps. 9,800 steps. 9,850 steps. 9,900 steps. 9,930 steps. Under LV Tao's dumbfounded gaze, Zhuowen's level soared straight up to 9,930. At this moment, he was only 20 levels away from LV Tao, and in the identity token, the light dots that represented the two of them were almost touching at this moment. This is impossible. LV Tao's eyes were filled with shock and disbelief as he continuously muttered. LV Tao's gaze contained a trace of madness and viciousness. LV Tao once again raised his hand and fiercely slapped the blood claw totem on his chest. A mouthful of fresh blood violently spurted out, and a terrifying blood mist erupted from LV Tao's body. In an instant, a sea of blood surged around LV Tao. Blood light filled the air, and a terrifying pungent smell of blood spread across the entire stage. The first place belongs to me, LV Tao, and not you, Hyun. If you want to snatch the first place, then show me some real ability. Chapter 523. The last light spot in Zhongling Mountain, the battle between Zhuan and LV Tao had reached its climax. Regardless of whether it was Zhuan or LV Tao, both of them had given their all in order to fight for the first place in Zhongling Mountain, as well as the right to ascend to the summit. They all knew that only the first place had the right to ascend to the summit of Zhongling Mountain. At this moment, regardless of whether it was the leaders of the various forces on the platform or the countless genius warriors in the square, all of them were silent. They held their breaths as their gazes were fixed on the light spots that were almost stuck together. Although most of them did not know what was going on between Zhuoan and LV Tao in Zhongling Mountain, They knew that the battle between Zhuowen and LV Tao had reached its climax. They all knew that the winner of the first place would be known very soon. Especially when they saw that the light spots that represented Zhuowen and LV Tao were chasing after each other and approaching each other, everyone's emotions reached a high point. A fierce battle between dragons and tigers. This is a true fierce battle between dragons and tigers. LV Tao went from the 9,700th step to the 9,950th step. His speed soared to the extreme at that moment. It could be said that he was so fast that it was dazzling. However, that Zhuowen is not bad either. He actually closed in step by step and did not give in at all. That's right. LV Tao obviously used some kind of secret technique at the end. That's why his speed became so fast. However, even though his speed was so fast, not only did Zhuowen not pull away from him, but he is now only 20 steps away from LV Tao. It's really terrifying. Between them, who will be the first? Sounds of discussion, uproar, and exclamations swept across the entire platform and square like a frenzied storm. Everyone was excited and expectant. They were all looking forward to who would be the first place in the end. On the platform, countless leaders could no longer sit still. They all stood up and stared at the Golden Tower. Zhuowen's miraculous performance had finally moved and shocked all the leaders. At this moment, everyone had forgotten that Zhuowen was only from a low-level city. They only knew that Zhuowen already had the qualifications to compete with LV Tao for first place. Moreover, the possibility of this was extremely high. Is this Zhuowen really just a warrior from a low-level city? What an incredible kid! To be able to force Lu Yitao, the #1 genius of Muqing County, into such a state, Zhuowen's name will shake the entire Muqing County even if he loses. Furthermore, if this Zhuowen is truly able to surpass LV Tao's ranking on Zhongling Mountain, his name will definitely shake the entire Muqing County. At the front of the platform, the 5 leaders who had extraordinary status and strength were also shocked. Among them, Lu Nanshan's expression was the most interesting. At this moment, Lu Nanshan's face was filled with undisguised shock. He was really shocked by Zhuowen's performance. As the leader of the House of Marquis Qin, he was very clear about how unfathomable LV Tao's strength was. However, Zhuowen was actually able to force LV Tao into such a state and even had the potential to surpass LV Tao at any time. This Zhuowen must definitely be recruited. The potential of such a genius is not inferior to LV Tao. If this kid is properly trained, he will be another LV Tao. In the Battle of the 9 Counties half a year later, he will also shine brilliantly. After the shock, Lu Nanshan's heart revealed a trace of pleasant surprise. As the leader of Muqing County in name, Lu Nantian placed the overall situation above all else. His breadth of mind was not something that an ordinary person could compare with. Even if Zhuowen were to defeat LV Tao and obtain the first place today, Lu Nantian would not make things difficult for Zhuowen. Instead, he would recruit him into the House of Marquis Qin and properly train him. This kind of genius was exactly what their Muqing County lacked. At this moment, within Zhongling Mountain, clouds were lingering and the mountain was trembling. Terrifying beastly roars continuously sounded throughout the entire Zhongling Mountain. On the 9,930th step, Zhuowen's entire body was trembling. His body that was covered with golden veins gradually began to crack. Streams of golden blood flowed through his body and landed on the steps below his feet. The pressure here was extremely terrifying. It was as if thousands of mountains were pressing down on his body. The extreme pain almost made Zhuowen have the urge to roar towards the sky. However, Zhuowen did not. At this moment, his expression was extremely calm, so calm that it was somewhat terrifying. Although the pain of the terrifying pressure pressing down on his body spread throughout his body, Zhuowen did not groan in pain. What's the point of pain? What's this little bit of pain? I've suffered much more than this. Could it be that I'm afraid of you? Boom. With a low roar, Zhuowen's feet suddenly stepped out and methodically climbed towards the top of the mountain. He knew that he was already very close to LV Tao. He was also extremely close to the top of the mountain. He would not fall down at this moment, nor did he want to fall down. At this moment, LV Tao's hair was disheveled. His expression was malevolent and painful. That crazy and blazing gaze filled LV Tao with a terrifying aura. Every 10 steps, LV Tao would subconsciously look at the identity badge in his palm. Then, he would punch the increasingly dim blood claw totem on his chest, barely supporting him as he continued to move forward. 9,960 steps. 9,970 steps. 9,980 steps. 9,990 steps. When LV Tao reached the 9,990th step, the pressure here had already reached an extremely terrifying level. Even LV Tao couldn't help but kneel on one knee under the pressure of the 9,990th step. Countless wounds appeared on his body as a bloody mist exploded. There are still 10 steps left. As long as I cross the 10th step, I will be able to reach the top of the mountain. And I will be the undisputed number one. LV Tao suddenly roared. His eyes were filled with madness. His hands formed into fists and fiercely smashed onto his chest. The powerful force caused him to involuntarily spit out a large mouthful of blood. At this moment, the extremely dim blood claw totem on his chest suddenly dissipated. The instant the totem dissipated, waves of terrifying energy finally filled LV Tao's body. This was the last bit of energy from the blood demon's blood essence. At this moment, LV Tao was clearly prepared to go all out. Tap tap tap. Heavy footsteps slowly sounded on the steps. LV Tao was walking very slowly, like an old cow pulling a cart. With heavy steps, he walked step by step towards the final peak of the mountain. 9,991 stair. 9,993 stair. 9,995 stair. 9,997 stair. 9,999 stair. Poochie. In the end, LV Tao's feet stopped at the 9,999 steps. He spat out another mouthful of blood and his expression became much gloomier. At this moment, he knew that he had reached his limit. The last step, the 10,000th step, let's cross it. I want to reach the peak of the mountain. A beast-like roar was emitted from his throat. LV Tao's expression was crazed as he stepped onto the 10,000th step without a care. Immediately, the entire Zhongling mountain trembled and the sky changed color. Boom boom boom. The invisible pressure on the 10,000th step seemed to have substance as it gathered into an invisible mountain that enveloped LV Tao. Poochie. Under this pressure, LV Tao was sent flying without any ability to resist. However, the instant he was sent flying, LV Tao's gaze focused on the peak of the mountain within the hazy clouds. At this moment, he seemed to be able to see the stone statue that stood on the peak of the mountain again. The huge and majestic stone statue seemed to be slowly lowering its head at this moment, silently gazing at LV Tao who was already flying away. What exactly is on the peak of the mountain? What exactly is there? Back then, LV Hantian had never seen it. Today, I have also never seen it. A soft sigh slowly sounded out. LV Tao took out his identity token and gently rubbed it. Instantly, it turned into a pillar of light and disappeared from Zhongling Mountain. He knew that he was unable to reach the peak of the mountain. At this moment, only Zhuan was left on the entire mountain. The entire Zhongling Mountain seemed to have suddenly become deathly silent the moment LV Tao left. The square and platform outside Zhongling Mountain also became incomparably silent. When LV Tao, who was covered in blood, finally appeared on the square, all the genius practitioners on the square had their mouths slightly agape. The atmosphere had become exceptionally strange and silent. No one had expected that LV Tao would leave Zhongling Mountain before Zhuan. At this moment, in the huge golden tower, almost everyone's name had become dim. The only light that was still shining was second, Tun, 9,950th step. Everyone was looking forward to the only figure left on Zhongling Mountain. Would this young man named Zhuowen's final result surpass LV Tao's record and forcefully reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain? At this moment, LV Tao's expression was gloomy and his brows were filled with exhaustion. The moment he appeared on the square, the other genius practitioners that belonged to the house of Marquis Qin in the square came to LV Tao's side and helped him to a quieter corner to recuperate from his injuries. Under the support of a few people, LV Tao's expression was still indifferent. However, his slightly trembling hands revealed the emotions in his heart at this moment. In the square, all the practitioners consciously opened up a path for LV Tao to walk through. Everyone stared at the young man in front of them in awe. They knew that this was a peerless genius who had almost reached the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Such a genius and expert would naturally receive everyone's respect and awe. Slowly sitting in the corner, LV Tao did not say a word from beginning to end. When he sat down, he immediately took out his identity token. His gaze was fixed on the light that was in second place, and his expression was filled with a complicated expression. He really did not expect that the young man, who he had not placed in his eyes back then, would actually be able to force him to such an extent in Zhongling Mountain. He had even forced him to use almost all of his trump cards. Yuan, first place will definitely be mine, unless you reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. Chapter 524. 9999 steps. At this moment, regardless of whether it was the platform or the plaza, everyone seemed to have a tacit understanding as they sunk into silence. Heavy and excited breathing sounds gradually spread out from the crowd as their gazes were tightly fixed on the huge golden tower. This was because the 1,000-story golden tower had almost completely dimmed. Only the second story at the top still had a spot of light that was as dazzling as a small sun. Second place, Zhuo 9,950 steps. He was only 49 steps away from first place, LV Tao. Everyone was anticipating whether Zhuowen would be able to continue climbing and surpass LV Tao's record, break Zhongling Mountain's record and reach the peak of the unparalleled mountain. At a corner of the plaza, LV Tao was seated with his legs crossed. However, his face was no longer as indifferent as before. Instead, it was intertwined with a complicated and nervous expression as his gaze was tightly fixed on the identity token. He wanted to personally see exactly what level Zhuowen could reach. The expressions of the four super geniuses, Luo Xing, Zhu Qi, Su Tianliang and Qin Badian, changed at this moment. The four of them blankly stared at LV Tao, who had a complicated expression on his face, before glancing at the identity token, at the spot of light that represented Zhuowen. Instantly, their hearts churned endlessly like stormy waves. LV Tao actually came out first? How can that Zhuowen be so strong? Qin Badian opened his mouth as he suddenly bitterly asked. Although Qin Badian admitted that Zhuowen's potential was extremely strong and his strength was not bad, from his point of view, he should be far from the number one genius of Muqin County, LV Tao. However, from the looks of it, the potential that Zhuowen had displayed was not the slightest bit weaker than LV Tao. In fact, to a certain extent, he was even stronger than LV Tao. Perhaps, this Zhuowen might be able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain and break the record of Zhongling Mountain that has existed for thousands of years. Luo Xing's beautiful eyes faintly flashed as she spoke with a complicated expression. Everything that Zhuowen had shown had far exceeded her imagination. This child's potential was far stronger than hers. Even LV Tao was slightly inferior. Su Tianliang's face was gloomy to the extreme. He said coldly, "To be able to hold on until now, this Zhuowen's potential is indeed not bad. However, to surpass Brother Liu's record and reach the peak of the mountain, that is simply a fool's dream." In the past thousands of years, no one has truly climbed to the summit of Zhongling Mountain. Even the brilliant Lu Hantian from the previous competition and the even more stunning Lu Yitao from this competition, these two exceptional geniuses have never climbed to the summit. It is unlikely that this Zhuowen will be able to reach the summit. Zhu Qi, who was dressed in blood-red clothes and whose eyes occasionally flashed with a blood-red glow, also stepped forward, his expression cold and indifferent. Didn't you think that Zhuowen wouldn't be able to catch up with LV Tao? But now, not only has Zhuowen caught up, but he has also forced LV Tao to leave Zhongling Mountain in advance. Now that you are so sure that Zhuowen won't be able to reach the summit, don't shoot yourself in the foot when the time comes. Seeing that Su Tianliang and Zhu Qi were united against a common enemy, a trace of disgust flashed across Luo Xing's beautiful eyes. She waved her hand and said impatiently, She had a hunch that Zhuowen might really be able to reach the summit and break the record that had not been broken for thousands of years. Su Tianliang and Zhu Qi's faces suddenly turned ugly when they heard this. However, they did not argue with Luo Xing too much. After all, there was an ancient restriction in this square. They did not dare to make a move. Moreover, even if they made a move, they might not be a match for Luo Xing. Luo Xing was the second genius of Muqing County after all. Her strength was also unfathomable. Even if they joined forces, they might not be able to gain the slightest advantage against her. Brother Zhu. This Zhuan must have a great secret on him. With his weak strength, he was actually able to catch up to Lve Tao in Zhongling Mountain. It seems that this secret must be extremely precious. When we reach the 4th level, we must join forces to kill him. Su Tianliang's eyes flickered as he suddenly sent a sound transmission to Zhu Qi beside him. Zhuowen's terrifying performance had already caused the killing intent in Su Tianliang's heart to surge to the extreme. If this child was not eliminated, there would be no end of trouble in the future. Zhu Qi's eyes flickered as he nodded slightly. He was also very curious about what kind of secret Zhuowen had that could allow him, a second-wheel Ultimate Emperor stage expert, to advance triumphantly in Zhongling Mountain and force Lve Tao to such an extent. Zhu Qi and Su Tianliang naturally did not believe that Zhuowen's performance in Zhongling Mountain was based on his own strength. This was because before they entered Zhongling Mountain, Zhuowen's strength was only at the peak of the second-wheel Ultimate Emperor stage. With such strength, how could he continuously break through and increase his strength in such a harsh environment as Zhongling Mountain? This was simply impossible, unless there was external help. Zhuowen silently stood on the 9,950th step, his gaze focused on the identity token in his hand. Especially when he saw the light dot at the first place dim, Zhuowen could not help but reveal a trace of surprise on his face. He did not expect that Lve Tao, who was only a step away from the 10,000th step, would not take another step. Instead, he chose to leave Zhongling Mountain. Is the last step of Zhongling Mountain really that terrifying? Zhuowen softly muttered as he raised his head slightly. His sharp gaze pierced through the layers of fog and shot towards the peak of the mountain. At this moment, at such a close distance, Zhuowen finally saw the hazy scenery on the peak of the mountain. Within the hazy clouds, there seemed to be a tall and solemn stone statue. The huge stone statue quietly stood on the peak of the mountain, as if it was holding up the entire sky. On the peak of the mountain, what is there? Even Lve Tao is so desperate and yearning for it. What is there on the peak of the mountain? Dang dang dang. As he spoke, Zhuowen suddenly stepped out and slowly walked towards the last 50th step at a moderate speed. He wanted to see if he had the qualifications to reach the peak of the mountain. He wanted to see what was there on the peak of the mountain, and what was it that kept attracting everyone to climb towards the peak of the mountain. The moment Zhuowen stepped out, all the warriors in the square were in an uproar because they discovered that Zhuowen, who had stayed on the 9,950th step for a long time, finally moved at this moment. Zhuowen has finally moved. He is moving towards the last 50th step. I wonder what level he can reach. This Zhuowen is indeed amazing. Although his speed is much slower now compared to Lve Tao, there is not much difference. I wonder if he can surpass Lve Tao's height. Countless gazes converged on the light that represented Zhuowen. Everyone's breathing became rapid and heavy. It was as if every step Zhuowen took was stepping on their hearts. It was incomparably shocking. Dang dang dang. 9,960th step. 9,970th step. 9,980th step. 9,990th step. Boom. The moment his foot stepped on the 9,990th step, the pressure on the entire step almost produced a qualitative leap. Zhuowen's body even trembled. He let out a muffled groan as a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. What a terrifying pressure. I really can't imagine how Lve Tao managed to persevere until the 9,999th step. Zhuowen did not retreat. Instead, his gaze was extremely firm. After feeling the powerful pressure here, he also felt Lve Tao's strength more and more. After all, Lve Tao wasn't like Zhuowen, who relied on the replenishment of spirit energy and the improvement of his strength. LV Tao had completely relied on his own strength and foundation to finally reach the 9,999th step. Even Zhuowen admired such a magnificent feat, 9,991 steps. Cross it for me. Resisting the pressure around him that was like the pressure of the deep sea, Zhuowen let out a low roar. His foot suddenly stomped on the 9,991st step. Suddenly, countless pressure turned into a whirlwind that blasted on Zhuowen's body. However, Zhuowen did not care. He directly stepped on the step like a madman. Puchi! A mouthful of blood was immediately spat out from his mouth. At this moment, Zhuowen's complexion became incomparably pale. Gritting his teeth, Zhuowen once again stepped forward, his speed as slow as an old ox pulling a cart. When Zhuowen stepped on the 9,990th step, the entire square was in an uproar. Uproars and exclamations were like a symphony, exploding across the sky and spreading to every corner of the square. Look, Zhuowen has reached the 9,990th step, and he's still slowly climbing. Perhaps he really can reach LV Tao's height, or even surpass him. This Zhuowen is really too heaven-defying. I'm afraid that he's the only genius who can force LV Tao to such an extent in this Origin Chi Tower battle. Swoosh! Sitting cross-legged in the square, LV Tao's face could no longer remain calm. His eyes were tightly fixed on Zhuowen's light spot. Especially after seeing that Zhuowen had indeed reached the 9,990th step, his heart became incomparably nervous. Moreover, what made his breathing even more hurried was that Zhuowen's light spot was still ascending. Although the speed was very slow, there were indeed no signs of it stopping. 9,991st step. 9,993rd step. 9,995th step. 9,997th step. When Zhuowen's light spot reached the 9,997th step, LV Tao was finally unable to suppress the anxiety in his heart. He abruptly stood up, his gaze constantly fixed on Zhuowen's light spot. At this moment, the square had become incomparably silent. Everyone blankly stared at the light spot that had already reached the 9,997th step. They knew that the difference between Zhuowen and LV Tao was only 2 steps. On Zhongling Mountain, countless pressure accompanied the rolling clouds. At this moment, Zhuowen's hair was disheveled, sweat pouring down like rain. His face was pale, and his body that was covered in golden veins seemed to show signs of collapsing. 9,998th step, cross it for me. His eyes scarlet red, Zhuowen roared towards the sky. The unyielding feeling in his heart wantonly drifted out with this roar. With a boom, Zhuowen endured the pressure and directly stepped onto the 9,998th step, only 1 step away from LV Tao. 9,999th step, cross it for me. Chapter 525. First place, at the peak of the mountain boom. Boom, boom. Tremors that seemed like the heavens were falling and the earth suddenly erupted from the entire Zhongling Mountain. It was as if the inside of Zhongling Mountain had collapsed at this moment. Countless beastly roars seemed to converge at this moment, forming a ring-shaped intense sound wave that spread out. The instant Zhuowen's foot stepped onto the 999th step, the surrounding pressure seemed to form countless spiral-shaped cyclones at this moment. With a sharp whistle, they condensed on Zhuowen's body. Puchi! The intense pressure caused Zhuowen to involuntarily vomit a mouthful of blood. His face was as pale as snow, the veins on his forehead bulged, and cold sweat trickled down. Under this pressure, the foot that he had taken a step forward stagnated in midair and was on the verge of collapse. Step over. 365 acupoints, open all of them for me. With a low roar, Zhuowen's entire body was bathed in blood. Then, the foot that had stagnated in midair was like a falling meteor. In the end, it landed on the 999th step. Then the entire Zhongling Mountain began to rumble. The instant Zhuowen reached the 999th step, the hearts of all the genius warriors in the plaza seemed to fiercely clench at this moment, and then violently beat for a moment. At this moment, the entire plaza became incomparably silent. Everyone stared straight at the light spot that represented Zhuowen. In the end, it overlapped with LV Tao's light spot, which had already dimmed. They knew that Zhuan had reached the 999th step. At this moment his ranking was already tied with LV Tao, tied for first place. Swoosh, swoosh. At this moment, regardless of whether it was the warriors in the plaza or the masters on the platform, they all stood up at this moment. Their gazes were tightly fixed on the light spot that was like a star in the vast starry sky. He reached it. Zhuan has reached the 999th step, tied with LV Tao for first place. Oh my god! This Zhuan has actually caught up to LV Tao, and is even tied with him. What kind of freak is this? I wonder if this Zhuan will be able to take the final step and reach the summit of the Zhongling Mountain. Uproars, exclamations, and clamors were like endless firecrackers exploding in the entire square. Everyone's emotions were boiling the moment Zhuan stepped onto the 9,999th step. Everyone's eyes were burning as they stared at the spot of light that was still shining brightly. They hoped, longed, and looked forward to whether this spot of light would be able to surpass LV Tao and reach the peak of the mountain. At this moment, LV Tao's pupils had almost shrunk to the size of a needle. His somewhat powerful hand tightly held the identity token. Looking at the light spot in the token that was at the same level as him, his expression suddenly changed. LV Tao muttered in a low voice. His eyes were filled with a complicated and crazy look. The pride he had always had in his heart, at this moment, was washed away the moment Zhuan reached the 9,999th step. How is this possible? This Zhuan is at the same level as LV Tao. He actually reached the 9,999th step? Su Tianliang exclaimed. His eyes were filled with disbelief as he stared at the light spot on the identity token. Zhuan's expression wasn't good either. He didn't expect that this Zhuan would be so tenacious. He was actually able to persist for so long in the Zhongling Mountain and finally reach the same height as LV Tao. As for Qin Batian and Luo Xing, their eyes were filled with intense shock. At this moment, Zhuan had undoubtedly become much more dazzling and blazing in their eyes. So what if this Zhuan reached the 9,999th step? In the entire Zhongling Mountain, other than the peak, there's nothing good. Without reaching the peak, no matter how high you climb, it's useless. I'm afraid that in a while, this kid will directly withdraw from the Zhongling Mountain. Su Tianliang's expression was extremely gloomy. His gaze coldly focused on the light spot that represented Zhuan on the identity token. He knew that not long after LV Tao reached the 9,999th step, he directly withdrew from the Zhongling Mountain. Obviously, the pressure of the 10,000th step of the Zhongling Mountain was terrifying. Even a peerless genius like LV Tao couldn't resist it. He didn't think that Zhuan was more powerful than LV Tao. After all, the fact that the former was able to be at the same rank as LV Tao was already extremely shocking. Time passed by minute. Everyone in the square stared at Zhuan's light spot. They all wanted to see if this Zhuan could surpass LV Tao and reach the peak of the mountain. As time passed, everyone discovered that the light spot that represented Zhuan was gradually dimming. They weren't unfamiliar with this sign. It was a sign that the owner of the light spot couldn't hold on any longer. Once the light spot showed signs of dimming, it meant that the owner of the light spot had reached his limit. It also meant that this person would soon withdraw from the Zhongling Mountain. Zhuan's light spot is gradually dimming. Could it be that he can only reach the 9,999th step? The peak of the Zhongling Mountain is too terrifying. Even the two peerless geniuses, LV Hantian and LV Tao, were unable to cross the 10,000th step. Even Zhuan, who has repeatedly created miracles, will probably return in failure. Zhuan's light spot became dimmer and dimmer. Many people in the square revealed a trace of disappointment. Originally, they were looking forward to Zhuan breaking the record of the Zhongling Mountain and reaching the peak of the mountain. Now, it seemed that this wishful thinking was unlikely to be realized. When the originally nervous LV Tao discovered that Zhuan's light spot was gradually dimming, he couldn't help but gently sigh in his heart. He was truly worried. If Zhuan really reached the peak of the mountain, he didn't know what kind of emotions he would have in his heart. After a moment of silence, LV Tao suddenly whispered to himself, "In this year's Yuan Qi Tower battle, perhaps only you are my opponent and have the qualifications to compete with me for first place." The moment LV Tao gradually put away the command token, he suddenly caught a glimpse of the dimming dot of light from the corner of his eye. Suddenly, the dot of light once again glowed with a blazing light. At this moment, that light seemed so dazzling. On the 9,999th step, the golden veins in Zhuowen's body seemed to have ruptured. Countless amounts of blood suffused with a golden glow continuously flowed out from his body, causing Zhuan to be filled with a tragic beauty. The 10,000th step. At the peak of the mountain, step over it for me. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with madness. Terrifying blood vessels filled the area around his eyes. His face was sinister, his expression was mournful, and his entire body was battered and exhausted. However, Zhuowen's face was filled with an unyielding expression, filled with unwillingness, and filled with no fear. In fact, Yuan could already clearly see the huge stone statue standing at the peak of the mountain behind the hazy fog. The stone statue seemed to be silently looking down at Zhuan at this moment, seemingly mocking and pitying him. Boom, boom, boom. However, Zhuowen's foot that had been lifted into the air ultimately came to a halt. No matter how much Zhuowen struggled, no matter how unwilling he was unable to land on the 10,000th step that seemed to be within reach. Pucci. Like a raging wave, the pressure sealed Zhuowen's surroundings from all directions and bombarded Zhuowen's body. Suddenly, Yuan felt as if his body was attached to a huge mountain. Then, his chest felt numb, and he was directly sent flying by the powerful pressure. Zhuowen felt his mind go blank as he hovered in the air. His eyes were fixed on the stone statue on the mountain peak. The stone statue had been looking at him all this time. It seemed to be mocking him, but it also seemed to be pitying him. It was as if it had some kind of magical power. Living in this world is like living in thorns. If the heart is not moved, one will not act rashly. If one does not move, one will not be hurt. If one is moved, one will act rashly. One will hurt one's body and bones, thus experiencing all the pain in the world. The moment Zhuan was sent flying, the golden torrent in Zhuowen's sea of consciousness suddenly transmitted a solemn voice. Immediately, it filled Zhuowen's ears and mind. Slowly, Zhuowen closed his eyes. At this moment, he was no longer looking at the statue at the peak of the mountain. Instead, he was immersed in the solemn voice. At this moment, he thought of the boundless sea, the towering mountains that reached into the clouds, the vast wilderness, and the blue sky with rolling clouds. The moment Zhuowen suddenly opened his eyes, they were unknowingly filled with dense golden light. If the heart is not moved, one will not act rashly. If one is not moved, one will not be hurt. If one is moved, one will act rashly. One will hurt one's body and bones, thus experiencing all the pain in the world. If the heart is not moved, then there will be no thoughts, and see through everything. Everything is nothing, right? At this moment, Zhuan seemed to have understood something. When his eyes that were filled with golden light once again looked at the peak of the mountain, the stone statue that stood there did not exist. Or rather, it did not exist at all. Zhuan was standing on the 9,999th step. He stood tall, his black robes fluttering in the absence of wind. So that's how it is. The 10,000th step of Zhongling Mountain does not have any pressure at all. Instead, it is a realistic illusion. The moment I stepped onto the 10,000th step, I had already fallen into that strange but realistic illusion. If I am unable to completely break through it, then I will never be able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. So, with that, Zhuan stomped his foot and directly stepped onto the 10,000th step of Zhongling Mountain. Then the entire mountain shook violently, crack. When LV Tao caught a glimpse of the originally dim light spot from the corner of his eye, it actually glowed again at this moment. When it lit up like a candle, LV Tao was completely stunned on the spot. His face was filled with disbelief. Moreover, Zhuowen's light spot suddenly became dazzling at this moment. It was like a slowly rising sun. It became more and more dazzling and finally became dazzling. Then, the light spot that had been stagnant suddenly moved slightly. It crossed the 9,999th step and finally reached the 10,000th step that no one had ever stepped onto before. Crack. Chapter 526. Everyone was in an uproar. When this message finally appeared on everyone's identity medallion and golden pagoda, no matter if it was the genius cultivators on the square or the leaders of the various forces on the platform, they all fell into a dead silence at this moment. After a period of absolute silence, the entire square was filled with an uproar. The sound was getting louder and louder, as if the sky was collapsing and the sea was collapsing, suddenly engulfing the crowd. On the summit, Zhuan has reached the summit. He has obtained the first place of Zhongling Mountain. Isn't this too unbelievable? This Zhuan has actually crossed the 10,000th step, surpassing LV Tao and obtaining the first place. Not only that, this Zhuan is the first cultivator in history to reach the summit of Zhongling Mountain. This person has broken the record of Zhongling Mountain that has existed for thousands of years. Everyone went crazy, excited, roaring, and even self-mutilating themselves to calm the emotions in their hearts. They never thought that Zhuan would be able to reach the summit of Zhongling Mountain in the end, breaking the record that no one had ever set before. From now on, Zhuan's name would truly shake Muqing County. His reputation might even surpass the original #1 genius of Muqing County, LV Tao. LV Tao stared blankly at the identity medallion that had already turned into fragments in his hand, as well as the dazzling light within the fragments. His expression was filled with a complicated expression. This was the first time he had tasted the feeling of defeat. This feeling was so uncomfortable that it made him feel suffocated. Lun, I really never thought that you would be able to surpass me. However, defeating me in Zhongling Mountain doesn't necessarily mean that your strength is stronger than mine. It can only mean that your potential is higher than mine. I, LV Tao, am not that easy to surpass. When the time comes, I will still compete with you. Suddenly, a smile appeared on LV Tao's face. Within that smile, there was even a hint of battle intent hidden. This was the excitement and joy of finding an opponent that appreciated each other. LV Tao knew that ever since he was young, his path had been too smooth. He was #1 in everything. No matter who saw him, they would look at him with reverence and avoid him from afar. That was why he had developed such a proud and aloof personality. But now, Zhuan's stunning performance gave LV Tao a wake-up call. He finally knew that there was always someone better than him. He was too conceited and arrogant in the past. If Lu Nantian was here to see LV Tao's change, he would definitely be very gratified. This was because LV Tao had finally opened up after this failure. In other words, LV Tao had recognized himself, and his mentality had also changed. Perhaps, after this battle, LV Tao would make another breakthrough. Speaking of which, LV Nantian might have to thank Zhuan for suppressing LV Tao in Zhongling Mountain. Su Tianliang sucked in a breath of cold air. He even rubbed his eyes with his hand. When he stared at the identity token again, he was stunned on the spot. He did not expect that Zhuan would actually surpass LV Tao and finally reach the peak of the mountain. Zhuan, this hateful little bastard, actually reached the peak of Zhongling Mountain. How did this bastard do it? At this moment, Su Tianliang's eyes were filled with bewilderment. Zhuan's stunning performance had completely stunned him. How much potential and strength did one need to be able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain? Suddenly crushing the identity token in his hand, Su Tianliang's eyes were filled with killing intent. He thought to himself, I really did not expect this kid to reach this level. But when we reach the 4th floor, I want him to spit out all the benefits he obtained in Zhongling Mountain. I will also take that little bastard's life while I'm at it. Not far away, Zhu Qi, Qin Batian, and Luo Xing all had their mouths slightly open. The shock in their eyes was no less than Su Tianliang's. This Zhuan is really going to soar into the sky. This guy is the biggest dark horse I have ever seen. Qin Batian smacked his lips and said with a bitter smile, all of us have underestimated this Zhuan. This child's potential far surpasses ours. Being able to ascend to the peak of Zhongling Mountain can be considered to be well-deserved. Luo Xing sighed softly. Her beautiful eyes were filled with a complicated expression. She still remembered that when Qing Lian first mentioned Zhuowen's name in Jade Lady Star Court, she didn't care at all. She didn't even put Zhuowen in her eyes. Later, when the battle for the Origin Qi Tower began, Zhuowen defeated the geniuses of the 4 high-grade cities on the first floor and seized control of the Ascension Island. At that time, she had just begun to pay attention to Zhuowen. However, she didn't put him in her eyes. After all, Zhuowen's performance was barely passable. Then, when the Heaven and Earth monolith Zhuowen forcefully charged into the Heaven stage area, she finally began to size up this youth who didn't have an outstanding appearance. Later, when Zhuowen overcame all the difficulties in the training mountain and even defeated LV Yongxing, Zhuowen finally gained her attention. Because of this, she had even personally tried to recruit Zhuowen. However, what caused her to be surprised was that Zhuowen, who was clearly only an 18 or 19-year-old youth, had actually decisively rejected her invitation. The maturity and decisiveness he displayed ultimately caused her to have a higher opinion of him. However, the frustration of being rejected for the first time made Luo Xing unhappy and even a little angry. In the end, this kind of recruitment was left unsettled. Then, it was the battle for the ranking of the Zhongling Mountain. Zhuowen really underwent a transformation in the Zhongling Mountain. Step by step, he surpassed countless geniuses from the lowest level. Even she, who was one of the 5 great geniuses, was surpassed by him. And now, Zhuowen had caught up with the number 1 genius of Muqin County, LV Tao, and surpassed him. In the end, he reached the summit of the Zhongling Mountain. At this moment, Zhuowen's name had undoubtedly become much more dazzling. Now that she thought about it, Luo Xing suddenly realized that Zhuowen's experience could be described as a legend. This was a youth who constantly created miracles. What kind of person is he? Luo Xing's beautiful eyes quietly stared at the light that represented Zhuowen, and she once again asked such a question. Compared to the degree of excitement of the numerous geniuses in the square, on the platform at the summit of the 2nd level of the Vitality Tower, countless leaders had already involuntarily stood up at this moment. Even LV Nantian, the master of the meteorite, and the other 4 magnates had also stood up. Their hearts were like raging waves. Gulp. The sound of saliva being swallowed could be heard on the somewhat quiet platform. No one had expected that Zhuowen would actually surpass LV Tao in the end and become the number 1 of the Zhongling Mountain this time. Moreover, he had even reached the summit of the Zhongling Mountain. He broke the record of the Zhongling Mountain that had existed for thousands of years, and also created an immortal legend. In the countless Vitality Tower battles, no genius has ever reached the summit of the Zhongling Mountain. He has really reached the summit. At this moment, LV Nanshan's entire body suddenly trembled. His hands trembled as he stared straight at the dazzling light at the top of the Golden Tower. His eyes were filled with excitement and a complicated expression. He was excited because someone had finally broken the record of the Zhongling Mountain. What was complicated was that the person who broke the record was not LV Tao, who he had high hopes for. And LV Nanshan's words were like a fuse that had been ignited. The entire silent platform was set off in an uproar like a huge wave. All of the leaders of the various factions had heated gazes as they discussed, chatted, and discussed. The focal point of these discussions was undoubtedly Zhuowen. In fact, the gazes of many of the leaders of the various factions were currently gathered on Gu Yuetian, Qiu Chou, and Ouyang Yuntu. They all knew that these 3 people were undoubtedly the 3 people who had the best relationship with Zhuowen. Especially Gu Yuetian, who was the city lord of Rattan Armor City. At this moment, Gu Yuetian seemed to have become a delicious cake in everyone's eyes. Everyone gathered around Gu Yuetian, and the sounds of discussion were even more overwhelming. Lord Gu Cheng, you must cooperate with our Golden Scale City. In any case, we are one of the top-ranked super cities. If you cooperate with us, we will agree to any conditions. What is your Golden Scale City? Our Black Rock City is one of the top 5 super cities. Our foundation is much deeper than yours. Lord Gu Cheng, if you cooperate with us, we will definitely give you a satisfactory price. Is your Black Rock City very amazing? Lord Gu Cheng, I am Ling Tian from Ling Tian City. If you cooperate with us, I, Ling Tian, am willing to give you a royal armor skill as a reward. What do you think? When this voice sounded out, the crowd gasped. Following this, a middle-aged man in white clothes smiled as he slowly walked towards Guyu Tian, his eyes filled with kindness. It's actually the city lord of the number 1 super city, Ling Tian City. Isn't this reward too generous? It's just a cooperation, yet he's willing to give us a royal armor skill. This Ling Tian is so generous. Ling Tian City is the super city closest to the top 5 super cities, and its foundation is much deeper than in ordinary super cities. It's not surprising that they would give us a royal armor skill. Since Ling Tian has acted, looks like we don't have a chance. Seeing Ling Tian slowly walk over, the other city lords inwardly cursed at their bad luck. They unwillingly stopped bothering Guyu Tian and instead looked at Guyu Tian. At this moment, Guyu Tian's mind was already muddled by the immense joy. Even he didn't expect that Zhuowen would actually surpass LV Tao and obtain first place, and even break the record to enter the peak of Zhongling Mountain. All of this, in his eyes, was like a dream, extremely unreal. With so many super cities looking at him with flattering smiles, even he felt a bit embarrassed. What's more, the city lord of Ling Tian City had used a royal armor skill in exchange for a chance to cooperate with Rat Tan Armor City. This caused his mind to go blank, and he felt as if he could not think at all. Happiness had truly come too suddenly at this moment, so sudden that even Guyu Tian wasn't prepared for it. I never thought that you would bring such great fortune to our Rat Tan Armor City. After we return, your Zhou family will have the same status as our city lord's residence and will have the same authority as our city lord's residence. Chapter 527. 3 Heavenly Tribulations. The moment Zhuowen reached the peak of the huge Zhongling Mountain, the clouds that were originally lingering around it completely disappeared, revealing the bare mountain and the peak of the mountain that towered into the clouds. On the square, everyone could not help but raise their heads. Their gazes were focused on the peak of Zhongling Mountain. They seemed to have seen a proud figure standing on the peak of the mountain. They knew that the figure was the only one who had reached the peak, Zhuowen. Zhuowen stood tall on the peak as a furious gust of wind blew over, causing his clothes and hair to flutter. Standing on the peak and looking down on all the living beings below, this feeling of looking down on all the mountains is truly wonderful. Zhuowen lowered his head and faced the raging wind in front of him. His gaze looked down at everyone in the plaza below Zhongling Mountain from top to bottom. He saw the unwilling Su Tianliang, the shocked Qin Badian, the complicated Luo Xing, the cold and emotionless Zhu Qi, as well as the calm LV Tao and the countless other geniuses in the square. The expressions on all their faces were magnified infinitely in Zhuowen's eyes, as if they were right before his eyes. At the same time, Zhuowen saw the entire 3rd floor of the tower from afar. It was a vast and desolate wilderness. Thick smoke filled the wilderness. It was simply a wasteland. Zhuowen slowly extended his right hand and gently pinched the air. It was as if everything below was within his grasp at this moment. The feeling of being in control of fate made Zhuowen feel a sense of excitement in his heart. My fate is in my own hands, not the heavens. Zhuowen raised his head slightly and roared. At the same time, waves of aura surged out from his body. This aura had far surpassed the peak of the 2nd wheel of the Ultimate Emperor Realm. It had even reached the 3rd wheel of the Ultimate Emperor Realm. This aura, is this kid about to break through? In his sea of consciousness, Xiaohei also felt the aura that had suddenly surged out from Zhuowen's body. A trace of surprise appeared on his face. But speaking of which, it's about time for this kid to break through. After all, Zhuowen has been at the peak of the 2nd wheel for quite some time. Coupled with the replenishment of the spiritual energy in Zhongling Mountain, his accumulation has become extremely deep. Now that he's reached the peak, it's only logical for him to break through. After pondering for a moment, Xiaohei was not too surprised. After all, Zhuowen had absorbed a lot of spiritual energy in Zhongling Mountain. Although most of the spiritual energy had been used to break through the apertures in his body, there would always be a portion of it that would flow into his meridians and dantian during the process of absorption. Although the amount of spiritual qi was small, it had accumulated over the course of many times. Thus, Zhuowen had naturally entered the ultimate three-wheel emperor realm. Boom, boom, boom. The moment Zhuowen's aura swelled to the peak of the third wheel, countless terrifying dark clouds that resembled black dragons gathered in the sky above Zhongling Mountain. Countless bolts of lightning as thick as buckets slithered between the dark clouds. It looked extremely ferocious and terrifying. The three heavenly tribulations had finally descended. As Zhuan prepared to undergo the three heavenly tribulations, all the cultivators in the square below Zhongling Mountain noticed the dark clouds that were constantly gathering in the sky above Zhongling Mountain, as well as the monstrous lightning that constantly flashed between the dark clouds. Is that a heavenly tribulation? That Zhuowen actually made a breakthrough after reaching the summit? He should have broken through. Those dark clouds are indeed unique to heavenly tribulations. However, Zhuowen's heavenly tribulation doesn't seem to be very strong this time. It doesn't seem like 5 heavenly tribulations. Yes, this aura is indeed much weaker than 5 heavenly tribulations. It's even weaker than 4 heavenly tribulations. It seems like it's only 3 heavenly tribulations. The moment the heavenly tribulation appeared, everyone in the square was stunned. This was because they discovered that the heavenly tribulation that appeared at the peak of Zhongling Mountain was pitifully weak. It wasn't the 5 heavenly tribulations that they had imagined at all. Due to Zhuowen's heaven-defying performance on Zhongling Mountain, everyone believed that Zhuowen's strength had at least reached the peak of the 4th wheel. Therefore, from the moment the heavenly tribulation appeared, they subconsciously believed that Zhuowen was going to undergo 5 heavenly tribulations. However, after careful observation, they were shocked to discover that the heavenly tribulation Zhuowen was undergoing was extremely weak. It was only at the level of 3 heavenly tribulations. In other words, Zhuowen had always been a peak of the 2nd wheel of the ultimate emperor realm. He's actually only a peak of the 2nd wheel of the ultimate emperor realm? How did this Zhuowen survive until the end on Zhongling Mountain with such meager strength and finally reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain? After confirming that the dark clouds at the peak of Zhongling Mountain were only 3 heavenly tribulations, all the cultivators in the square were stunned. They began to wonder how Zhuowen had reached the peak with such meager strength. Lve Tao frowned slightly in the corner of the square. Naturally, he could sense that the aura of the dark clouds at the peak of the mountain was extremely weak. It was only at the level of 3 heavenly tribulations. In other words, Zhuowen was only a peak of the 2nd wheel of the ultimate emperor realm. Just how did Zhuowen surpass me and reach the peak with such strength? Lve Tao clenched his fists and sucked in a deep breath. His heart was filled with doubt. Luo Xing, Su Tianliang, Qin Badian, and Zhu Qi also had the same doubts as Lve Tao. They were also surprised that Zhuowen was still only a peak of the 2nd wheel of the ultimate emperor realm. This little bastard must have known of some unknown shortcut in Zhongling Mountain. That's why he was able to reach the peak of Zhongling Mountain. It can only be said that the bastard's luck is pretty good. However, when he reaches the 4th level of the Origin Qi Tower, this bastard won't have such good luck. Su Tianliang's gaze was gloomy. After seeing the 3 heavenly tribulations at the peak of the mountain, his face was filled with joy instead of shock. He was even more certain that Zhuowen had reached the peak of Zhongling Mountain by using some secret that they didn't know of. Originally, Su Tianliang was worried that Zhuowen's strength would become very strong. When he reached the 4th level, it wouldn't be so easy to deal with him. However, the 3 heavenly tribulations had completely dispelled the worries in Su Tianliang's heart. He knew that even if Zhuowen had survived 3 heavenly tribulations, he was only a peak of the 3rd wheel of the ultimate emperor realm. Although this kind of strength wasn't bad, it wasn't enough in Su Tianliang's eyes. Thinking of this, Su Tianliang made up his mind. When he reached the 4th level of the Origin Qi Tower, he would make Zhuowen suffer a fate worse than death. He also wouldn't let go of the secrets on Zhuowen's body because he felt that there were many secrets on Zhuowen's body. Just as everyone in the square was filled with doubts, on the peak of the mountain, Zhuowen had his hands behind his back. He raised his head slightly and a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth as he looked at the rolling dark clouds in the sky. After reaching the entry level of the great Nirvana Sun, all 365 acupoints in his body had been opened. The strength of Zhuowen's body had already reached an unparalleled level. Just the strength of his body alone might not be able to break through the all-out attack of a peak Ultimate Emperor Realm cultivator. With Zhuowen's current strength, he didn't need to fear the 3 heavenly tribulations at all. In fact, there was even an eager look in his eyes. Ever since he had broken through the entry level of the Great Nirvana Sun, he hadn't tested the strength of his body. I can use these 3 heavenly tribulations to test the strength of my body and see how strong it has become. Zhuowen's eyes flickered as he clenched his right hand. Instantly, countless golden veins covered his arm. The blazing golden light illuminated Zhuowen's face, making it look dazzling. Boom, boom, boom. Finally, the countless bolts of lightning in the dense dark clouds in the sky collided with each other. Afterwards, huge bolts of lightning the size of buckets descended, each one more terrifying and thick than the last. It was as if the entire mountain peak had been enveloped by countless bolts of lightning, forming a huge cage of lightning. Compared to the terrifyingly huge lightning bolts, Zhuowen's somewhat frail body appeared so small and insignificant. However, it was this insignificant figure that fearlessly extended its arms and attacked the countless bolts of lightning that directly shot towards it. The next moment, when the huge cage formed by countless thunderbolts appeared, a golden light that was as hot as the sun spread out in all directions. Ring-shaped golden ripples spread out, faintly revealing a powerful power that was gradually transmitted in the air. Boom, boom, boom. Instantly, the huge cage of lightning collapsed inch by inch as the golden light spread outwards, disappearing into nothingness. A figure covered in golden light silently stood there, like an ancient Buddha. Again! Laughing loudly, Hun was not afraid at all. In fact, he even seemed to be enjoying himself. This was because he discovered that even the 3 heavenly tribulations were unable to cause any harm to his body. Not even his skin was broken. Boom, boom, boom. The dark clouds in the sky grew denser and denser, and the lightning became even more terrifying. Bolt after bolt struck Zhuowen's body as if they would not tire at all. However, Hun only smiled faintly. He completely ignored them and allowed the lightning to strike his body. Surprisingly, it did not cause any harm to his body at all. Instead, after the lightning struck, Zhuowen's body began to glow faintly. The might of the lightning was a form of tempering, even though the effects on Zhuowen were minuscule. After breaking through the last bolt of lightning, Zhuowen stood quietly on the mountain peak. A terrifying aura surged out from his body. This aura is much stronger than the initial and intermediate Ultimate Emperor Realm. Have I suddenly reached the advanced Ultimate Emperor Realm? Zhuowen muttered to himself in surprise as he sensed the powerful aura in his body. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.